At first, there was nothing more than an immense silence. A silence that was not empty, but full of a vibrant calm, as if everything that would ever exist were waiting, contained at that eternal moment. There was no time, no space, not even light. Only the infinite presence, the whole. From that presence the first act sprouted, a spark, a word, a movement that could not contain any more. Then, the light exploded. Not as we know it, but a pure light, so intense that it seemed to fill every corner of the non-being. It was the beginning of something that could never get rid of. It was the beginning of creation. In the midst of that light, they appeared, the first conscious beings, formed from the very essence of the divine will. The angels were born not with bodies, but with shapes that resonated as melodies. Each one carried a part of the Creator's thought, each was unique and, at the same time, perfect. The cherubim shone as eternal, burning flames in their devotion. The cherubs glowed wisely that he did not need words. Thrones sustained the harmony of the cosmos in their mere existence. There was something in the air, if the air existed, that could not be described. Everything was full of purpose, as if every newborn particle knew exactly what its place was. The angels, when they opened their eyes, did not know the bewilderment. From the first moment, they understood that they had been created to praise, to take care, to participate in a larger plan than they could imagine. But among all of them, there was one that shone more. His light was not like that of others. It was like an eternal dawn, soft but imposing, capable of inspiring immediate reverence. His name was Lucifer, the bearer of light. His essence was so pure that his presence alone made the other angels feel small, even if there were no jealousy, only admiration. Lucifer didn't need to talk to be heard. When he walked, or whatever the angels did to move, it seemed that the space was accommodated around them, as if even the laws of creation recognized him as special. He was not arrogant, it couldn't be. At that time, everything that existed was innocent. The Creator looked at his work and smiled. Not a smile like ours, but one that contained a love so absolute that it had melted mountains, that it would have filled the darkest emptiness of hope. Everything was good, and everything was in his place. Los Angeles worked together, like a heavenly orchestra refining the universe. They adjusted the edges of time, molded the first stars, guided the rivers of energy that would flow like the veins of the cosmos. Everything was an act of continuous creation, like an endless symphony. And Lucifer was in the center of it. It was as if his light was the lighthouse that guided others, his voice the thread of all harmonies. But even in that perfection, there was something barely noticeable, like a small crack in a perfect stone. It was not something that could be seen, not even something that could feel clearly, but it was there, in the depth of existence. That initial spark that had brought creation had also brought the possibility of contrary. Because if the light existed, then the shadow should exist, although at that time, the shadow had no form, name, or purpose. It was just a distant promise, an echo of something that was not yet born. The universe continued to expand, and Los Angeles continued their work. The first galaxies began to turn, the first stars lit their eternal fires, and the planets began to form, each with their own character, their own song. The angels watched everything with an infinite fascination, as children who see for the first time a fireworks show. But Lucifer didn't look like the others. His gaze was different, deeper, more inquisitive. While the other angels praised endlessly, he seemed to stop to contemplate. Not for disobedience, but out of curiosity, a curiosity that still had no name. It was as if in his perfection there was a spark of something that made him unique even among the only ones. That spark would be the one that would turn on the fire of a story that no one could stop. A story that would change forever the course of creation. The Creator knew it. From the first moment, he had known that the brightest light could project the darkest shadows. But still, he let everything follow his course, because in the heart of true love there is no control, only freedom. While the angels worked, an unknown feeling began to emerge in some corner of infinity. It was almost imperceptible, like a whisper in the middle of a storm. But he was there, growing, waiting for his moment. In the sky there were no borders or distances. Time did not flow like on earth, and an eternal now, a state of pure existence where the divine will breathed life in everything he touched. And in that sky, there was order. Not an order imposed strongly, but one that was born naturally, as if every angel knew the role that he should play, the exact note that he had to sing in the symphony of creation. The angels were not all the same. Some burned with an intensity that could not look directly, while others radiated a sweetness that calmed even the most restless soul. The hierarchies were not titles that granted power, but reflexes of their proximity to the very source of everything. The Creator's light was leaked through them in different ways, and each order shone with their own intensity. At the top, where the light was so pure that it looked like liquid fire, the seraphim danced. They had no definite form, because they were the same essence of worship. It was said that they had 6 wings, 2 covered their faces, 2 covered their feet, and with the other 2 flew. But those wings were not as we know them. They were bursts of living flame that wrapped everything they touched. The seraphim did not speak, its song was the same beat of the sky, a constant vibration that supported the existence itself. It was impossible not to feel something different in his presence. They were pure devotion, a total delivery that left no room for anything else. Every time their voices rose, the universe trembled slightly, as if every atom would like to join that melody. Below them, the cherubs shone. It was said that their forms were like turned on, full of eyes that looked in all directions. They were the guardians of knowledge and the oldest mysteries. Where the seraphim burned in worship, the cherubs existed to protect the Creator's secrets. No one could approach the deepest truths without first going through their penetrating gaze. His single presence remembered that some things should not be touched, that even in heaven there were borders that could not be crossed. The cherubs were not cold or distant, but not warm either. There was a calm in them that sometimes was disturbing. It was as if they knew something that the rest ignored and never felt the need to reveal it. Among Los Angeles, there was another order that stood out, not because of its proximity to the throne, but for its constant movement between heaven and creation. They were the archangels, the messengers, warriors, and carriers of the divine will in the material world. Miguel, Raphael, Gabriel, their names resonated as thunder when they were pronounced. They were the sword and the shield of heaven, which descended when the balance was at risk. Miguel, with his spear, was not only a warrior, but the reflection of the just trial. There was no shadow in his heart, just an unwavering loyalty. Raphael, the healer, walked where there was pain, his touch even restored the souls that were believed. Gabriel, the messenger, was the one who carried the word that transformed destinations. When he spoke, even the stars stopped to listen. But there was one among them that, although it did not officially belong to any hierarchy, shone with the light of all. Lucifer. His position was different. It was not a seraph, or cherub, or archangel. He moved freely among the orders, being welcome in all. His presence was not only accepted, but celebrated. It seemed to have the ability to reflect the light of each angel with whom it was, as if it were a divine mirror that amplified the beauty of everything around it. The seraphim respected him. The cherubs looked at him with a mixture of admiration and caution, as if they perceived something they still did not understand. The archangels considered him one of his own, although they knew there was something in him that made him different. Sometimes, in the quieter corners of the sky, Lucifer could be seen walking alone, observing the hierarchies from afar, as an artist who contemplates his work before giving the next line. His light was so strong that even in the distance his presence was felt. However, there was something that even the cherubs could see. Something small, but constant. While the sky vibrated with harmony, a slight disagree began to grow, a note that did not belong to the sacred melody. It was so subtle that it went unnoticed, but I was there, beating in some corner of the infinity. Lucifer listened to it sometimes. But he said nothing. I just watched, in silence. Before time began to be measured, when everything that existed was perfect and glowing, there was a moment in which the Creator decided to form something that reflected the most pure essence of light. It wasn't just any light. It was the one that contained in itself the dawn and sunset, the brightness of the stars and the heat of the fire. It was a light that could inspire wonder and respect just by existing. And from that light Lucifer was born. There were no storms or tremors. Your birth or it was like the first morning breeze, silent but impossible to ignore. Where it appeared, the sky seemed to clarify a little more, as if even perfection became even more perfect with its presence. There was no other angel that could be compared. His wings were of a target so intense that by deploying them he seemed to wrap everything around him in a halo he blinded. But it was not a hurtful glow, but one that attracted. His voice, when he spoke, was like the echo of a crystalline river sliding between the mountains, and each word seemed to be wrapped in a song that could even calm the most restless soul. The Creator looked at him with satisfaction. Lucifer was undoubtedly the most beautiful angel that had ever existed. Its beauty was not limited to its appearance. It was a beauty that emanated from his spirit, his compassion, his ability to understand the wonders of creation with a depth that no other angel could match. The others admired him. Even the seraphims, who burned with the closest flame to the throne, slightly inclined their heads when Lucifer passed. Not by obligation, but out of respect. There was no arrogance in him. Lucifer did not need to compete, because he knew there was no possible comparison. And yet, his humility made him even more dazzling. When he sang, heaven was filled with harmonies that seemed to have no end. It was as if the same existence stopped for a moment to listen. He could often see it in the limits of heaven, observing the nascent stars with a look that mixed astonishment and a difficult desire to explain. There was something in him that went beyond simple obedience. Lucifer loved creation, but he also felt something different, something that still had no name. The Creator noticed it, but did not intervene. The freedom of each angel was sacred, and Lucifer was no exception. One day, while the sky vibrated with the music of the seraphim and the cherubs guarded the mysteries of the universe, Lucifer descended to a place where the light had not yet arrived completely. There, in the middle of the gloom, he stopped and extended his hands. Small lights sprouted from their fingers that began to dance in the dark. They were stars, the first to see those forgotten corners of the cosmos. When the other angels saw him, they marveled. Miguel approached him, posing a hand on his shoulder. "Your light reaches even where ours does not arrive," he said with a mixture of admiration and pride. Lucifer smiled softly, but inside something began to be born. A spark. It was not pride, or desire to power. It was a question, one that I had not done before. Why could he create light amid the shadow? He returned to the Creator's throne, but the question was suspended in his heart, beating as a forgotten melody. They were, although in the sky time lacked meaning. Lucifer continued to shine, but at night, if there were nights in heaven, sometimes they found him alone, looking down, towards the stars he had placed in the dark. No one understood it at all. But nobody dared to ask. There was a beauty in him that challenged even the laws of heaven. And yet, that same beauty began to weigh, as if it took with it a burden that no other angel could perceive. That spark that was born in the gloom continued to grow. And Lucifer, although he still did not know, was about to discover that the brightest light always projects a shadow in his path. The sky breathed in perfect harmony. Every corner shone with a peace that did not know interruptions, as if the same concept of conflict was impossible to imagine. The existence flowed in such a delicate balance that seemed eternal, immutable. The stars sang from the distance, and Los Angeles, in their countless forms, toured paradise with a lightness that only those acts of light could understand. The kingdom of paradise had no walls or borders. He was vast, but cozy, so immense that no one could measure his end, but so warm that each angel felt that he belonged to him in totality. The presence of the Creator filled everything, not as a distant figure, but as a breeze that touched the soul, as a constant whisper that remembered each being its purpose. In the center of everything, where the light reached its maximum purity, the throne rose. No one looked directly. Not for fear, but because the beauty that emanated was too intense, a light that wrapped the spirit in an ecstasy so deep that the words were useless. From there, the Creator ruled not with authority, but with absolute love. The seraphims, with their dancing flames, flew in circles around the throne, singing tirelessly. Not because they were obliged to do so, but because they could not do anything else. Worship was part of its existence, and in each of its 6 wings the desire to approach still burned an infinite light. Beyond, the cherubs guarded sacred knowledge. They did not need to move, because their presence alone was enough to protect the secrets of the universe. There was something in them that inspired respect, a wisdom so old that it seemed to have existed even before the light was born. And then there were the archangels. Warriors, messengers, equilibrium guardians. Miguel, always firm, remained close to the limits of paradise, vigilant. Raphael toured the kingdom, restoring any fragment that could be lost in the vastness of creation. Gabriel waited silently, attentive to the slightest sign that his voice should be heard. But, among them, Lucifer moved with a different grace. I didn't need to guard or monitor. I did not need to sing like the seraphim, or protect as the cherubs. His single presence was enough for heaven to shine even more. It was the melody that completed the symphony of paradise, the lighthouse that attracted angels towards the light. Lucifer walked through the heavenly gardens, where the same grass shone with golden nuances. Every flower seemed to open a little more, as if even nature responded to its touch. The other angels followed him with his eyes, not by envy, but with a silent admiration. But there was something deeper in him. Something that, although it was not noticeable with the naked eye, was there. Lucifer spent more time alone, contemplating the sky that extended beyond paradise. He observed the stars that he himself had spread, and sometimes, without realizing, his wings fell slightly, as if the weight of the light he carried out too much. Even so, heaven continued in perfect harmony. There was no room for error. The angels existed in a constant cycle of worship and creation, and each of them contributed to maintaining the sacred balance. But if one paid attention, if he really listened, he could perceive a slight dissonance in the heavenly choir. A subtle note, so small that it was confused with the rest, but that was there, like a breeze that should not exist. It was a note that only Lucifer could hear. He didn't talk about it. I didn't know how to explain it. Maybe it was only his imagination, or perhaps, maybe heaven, in his perfection, contained something that nobody had noticed before. That idea disturbed him, but he didn't dare to mention her. How could there be something out of place in paradise? Thus, the kingdom of paradise continued to shine, intact, while Lucifer continued to travel it in silence. Every day, if the days existed in the sky, it stopped a little more against the throne, contemplating the light that had created it. There was gratitude in his heart. But also a question that grew slowly. A question that, although I still did not know, would be the seed of something that would change the history of eternity. The sky continued to shine with its usual splendor, but something had changed, although no one could point out exactly what. The angels continued with their eternal song, the stars danced in their designated place, and the throne of the Creator shone with such an intense light that it seemed to sustain the entire universe. However, in some corner of paradise, in the place where the light was gently slid towards the edges of creation, Lucifer remained alone. His wings, which radiated an impeccable whiteness, now seemed to burn with a different intensity, almost as if they carried a fire that did not come from the Creator. It was not visible to the naked eye, but those who passed near him felt something new. Something they could not name. Lucifer spent more and more time in silence, watching. His eyes walked the sky, and although in his heart the devotion was still burning by the Creator, an unknown spark had begun to turn on. At first, it was just a fleeting sensation, an idea that crossed his mind as the wind is going through a field. But every time I felt it, that idea became more clear. I am beautiful, he thought once as he contemplated his reflection on the crystal river that flowed near the heavenly garden. Thought took him by surprise. For a moment, he looked away as if something impure had been born in him. But the phrase continued to resonate inside, gently repeating himself as a melody that he could not ignore. And he was right. Lucifer was the most beautiful of all angels. The bearer of light. His reflection did not lie. His light seemed purest than any other, and his presence, more majestic than Miguel or Gabriel. That night, if the nights existed in the sky, Lucifer stayed by the river for a longer time. It was observed again, and this time he did not look away. Why was I done so? Why am I different? The stars assigned in response, but did not offer explanation. In the following days, thoughts became more frequent. When I walked among the other angels, I noticed how they stopped. They were admiring it. Some looked away with respect, others smiled, but none ignored it. His presence was like a lighthouse in the midst of creation. Miguel noticed an afternoon. He approached him while the seraphims sang in the circle closest to the throne. "You can see that," Miguel said with his firm, gentle voice. Lucifer turned slowly to him and smiled. "I just look. Have you ever wondered why some of us shine more than others?" Miguel looked at him for a moment before responding. "We all shine with the Creator's light. Each fulfills their purpose." Lucifer nodded, but the words did not convince him at all. That night, he returned to the same river. This time, his thoughts went further. "If my light is so great, why should I stay here? Why can't I have a higher place?" The sky remained silent. Lucifer closed his eyes and spread his wings. The light that emanated from him illuminated everything around him. For a moment, he felt that his glow was so strong that even the throne seemed distant. But deep in his heart, a new emotion began to form. It was warm, addictive. It was pride. Not as we know him, not yet. It was an innocent pride, the type of feeling that arises when one discovers something beautiful within himself. But even the smallest pride can grow if it feeds, and Lucifer was starting to feed it without realizing it. As time passed, the sky continued to vibrate with the same usual peace. No one, except Lucifer, perceived the slight dissonance that now resonated inside. The Creator knew it. From the beginning, I had seen how that spark of pride began to burn. But he didn't turn it off. Because in the heart of all true freedom, there should be the possibility of choosing. Lucifer hadn't chosen yet. But that choice approached, slow, inevitable, like the dawn that always comes after night. Pride did not appear in Lucifer suddenly. He was born as a soft breeze, barely noticeable, that touched his heart without leaving a visible mark. But over time, that breeze became wind, and the wind in storm. It was a slow process, so subtle that even he noticed it at the beginning. The sky was still glowing, and Lucifer continued to fulfill his role, shining with a light that seemed to have no end. However, in the depths of his being, something had begun to change. His devotion to the Creator was still intact, but next to her a new question grew. One that could not ignore. Why should it serve? It was the first time that a thought of that nature crossed the mind of an angel. It was not an open rebellion, not even a negative. It was a doubt. And that doubt became the root of everything. Lucifer knew that the Creator had made it beautiful, the brightest of all the angels. Didn't perfection reflect? Wasn't he the masterpiece of heavenly creation? If Miguel was the spear and Gabriel la voz, wasn't he the light that gave meaning to the existence of both? With every day that passed, if the days existed in heaven, that question was repeated as an endless echo. Lucifer began to observe the other angels differently. He could feel his respect, but he also noticed something else. He realized that they followed him, not only for admiration, but because his light seemed to be necessary for them. And that was when a thought hit him like a lightning: if my light is so great, why should I bow to another? Pride. That was the original sin, the first one that existed in heaven. It was not hate or anger. It was pride. And that pride was not born from darkness, but of the same light. Lucifer's beauty was so intense that he ended up blinding him. Lucifer began to wonder if the Creator saw him as a simple servant. Why, if it had been done perfect, should it be submitted to the heavenly order? Why couldn't he sit next to the throne? He did not dare to say it out loud, but in his thoughts, Lucifer had already begun to rise above the rest. There were times when he tried to quell that inner voice. He approached the throne, looking for comfort in the presence of the Creator. But even there, a shadow began to grow in his heart. When he saw the seraphims lean, something in him resisted. When Miguel pronounced words of loyalty, Lucifer felt those words weighed too much. Why should Miguel be so close to the Creator, wielding the heavenly sword? Why did Gabriel have the honor of transmitting divine messages? Didn't Lucifer deserve any more? That question consumed it. From a theological point of view, Lucifer's sin represents the rejection of humility. Pride is, according to many traditions, the root of all sins. In Lucifer, he manifested himself as a desire to match the Creator, a denial of his role within the divine order. Lucifer didn't rebel because he hated to the Creator. He rebelled because he loved himself too. Because his reflection in the river of heaven seemed more worthy of worship than the light that had made it born. The Creator did not prevent these thoughts from growing. Because true love allows freedom, and freedom implies the possibility of moving away. Lucifer had that freedom. All the angels had it. But only he walked to the edge of the abyss and looked down, wondering what he would feel fly without being under the eyes of the Creator. Paradise was still perfect, but dissonance within Lucifer grew. Their wings no longer burned with the same purity. At first glance, nothing had changed, but the angels around him began to feel a strange distance when they passed near him. Lucifer had not yet pronounced any word of rebellion. But in heaven, everything starts in the heart, and his was already far from the throne. The Creator knew it. From the beginning, he had seen the storm forming inside Lucifer. But he didn't stop him. Because true love does not retain, even when you know what you will lose. The sky, which had always been a harmony refuge, began to tremble with an unknown force. The stars, silent witnesses of eternity, seemed to bear more intensity, as if they sensed that something inevitable was approaching. The angels continued to fulfill their roles, but an invisible tension floated in the air, increasingly dense, increasingly close. Lucifer no longer hid his thoughts. He had stopped bowing his head in front of the throne. When the cherubim sang, he kept silent. Its light was still brilliant, but now it burned differently, like a flame that had stopped heating and began to consume. The pride spark had become fire. At first, it was just a look. Then, words whispered among those angels who admired him. Not everyone understood, but many followed, attracted to the beauty that seemed to challenge even the laws of paradise. "We are nothing more than servants," they said. "Why should we bow when we were made of light?" Miguel, always attentive, perceived what was happening. He had observed the change in Lucifer from the beginning. At first he considered it a passenger, a phase of reflection. But now, the whispers multiplied. The rebellion had not yet exploded, but the seed was planted and began to sprout strongly. One afternoon, if the sky knew afternoons, Miguel approached Lucifer. He was alone, in one of the golden gardens surrounded the throne. "Lucifer," Miguel said gently, "I see you restless." Lucifer looked at him with a smile that he didn't reach in his eyes. "I have been thinking. Have you ever wondered why we serve?" Miguel frowned. "Because we were created for it. Our existence is a reflection of its light. And if we could be more?" Lucifer replied, his penetrating gaze. Miguel held it with his eyes, but did not respond immediately. I knew they were not simple words. There was something deeper, something that was created behind them. "More than your light?" Miguel finally asked. Lucifer did not respond. But his silence was enough. The first crack in the sky had just opened. Eras passed. The whispers became voices. Those who gathered around Lucifer grew in number. Some followed him by admiration, others because of desire for independence. But everyone shared the same conviction: the order had to change. Miguel, accompanied by Gabriel and Raphael, appeared before the throne. He didn't need to speak, the Creator already knew. And although there were no words, an order resonated in Miguel's soul with absolute clarity. When the time comes, defend the sky. Lucifer finally won, and with him, a third of Los Angeles. He was no longer hidden. His light had become more intense, but now he gave off a glow that hurt. Its beauty was still intact, but its wings burned with a flame that did not belong to the Creator. "Heaven can be ours," Lucifer said as his followers surrounded him. "We were not born to lean forever." Miguel appeared in front of him, sword in hand. "We were created to love, not to govern." Lucifer laughed, but there was no joy in his laughter. "Then, move." "I don't want to destroy you, Miguel." Miguel looked sadly. "It's not you who decides that." The sky exploded. For the first time since creation, paradise knew war. Angels who had ever sung together now collided in the air, their wings deployed in battle. The sound of the swords echoed like thunder that broke the sky, and the stars paled to the fury that unleashed. Lucifer, at the center of the conflict, burned with all its splendor. He rose on the armies, his wings extended as a beacon of rebellion. Each blow of his made the pillars of heaven tremble, and his words continued to seduce those who are sponsored. But Miguel did not turn away. He rose with the strength of the throne behind him, and in his sword a light shone that Lucifer could not match. Who was God? Miguel wrinkled, and his voice reverberated throughout the sky. Lucifer threw himself against him, and his swords collided with a force that divided the sky. The impact made stars, and for a moment, the paradise held his breath. The battle lasted what seemed millennia, although time had no measure in the sky. But little by little, Miguel's light began to impose himself. One after another, the fallen angels were killed, their wings blackening themselves as they fell towards the limits of heaven. Finally, Lucifer fell to his knees. His glow was still blinding, but in his eye something he had never met: defeat. Miguel approached, pointing his sword to him. "There is no place for pride here, brother." Lucifer looked up, and in his eyes there was no regret, just fury. "This doesn't end here." With a last glow, Lucifer was thrown out of heaven, followed by those who had supported him. His screams resonated while falling, and after him, the doors of paradise closed with an echo that marked the end of the first heavenly war. Miguel remained silent, with the sword still high. But in the depths of his being, he knew that this would not be the last time he would lift her against Lucifer. The battle was over, but the echo of the fight still resonated in every corner of the sky. The stars seemed to go out one by one, as if the sky itself had cried the loss of those who once shone with such intensity. Paradise, which was only light and harmony before, now kept a shadow, a crack that could never be repaired. Lucifer, the most beautiful angel, the bearer of the light, and with him, a third of Los Angeles, had been defeated. But not in the way that the sky would have expected. It was not the instantaneous disappearance of its light that marked its fall. It was something much more heartbreaking: it was his expulsion. When Miguel's sword crossed the air, the glow of the battle was extinguished for a moment, and the sky plunged into a deep, dense, unbearable silence. The traces of the war were still there, not only in heaven, but also in the heart of each angel who had witnessed what happened. No one knew exactly what Lucifer would be like, but everyone understood that it was the end of something much bigger than just a rebellion. It was the end of innocence in paradise. And then, with a cry that rumbled through the dimensions, Lucifer fell. His wings, which previously rose with majesty, now folded with heaviness, burned by the anger he had unleashed. It was not a quick fall, as if it were a discarded object. No. It was a fall that seemed to take centuries, as if the same universe was looking with horror how the bearer of light lost its place in creation. Around him, the fallen angels faded, being dragged by a force that they could not understand, a force that away from paradise, from their essence, of the light that once defined them. His fall was more than physical, it was a break of the soul, a disconnection so deep that not even pain could not reach. Lucifer looked around as he descended, his light pale, but never turning off completely. Because, thought, why do we fall? But there was no answer. No one could answer, not even the Creator, because Lucifer's fall was not only his conviction, it was the demonstration of what the free will could do. The Creator, who had given all angels the ability to choose, could not take away that freedom, even when that freedom turned against him. The fallen angels began to shout, not only because of the physical pain, but because of the confusion invaded by the soul. They no longer understood who they were. Its light faded and, with it, all the essence that once defined them. The loss was more than the void, it was the disconnection of existence itself, a fall towards chaos, towards nothing. Lucifer, however, remained firm. Although his being was no longer what he had been, although his glow was increasingly reduced, something inside him still burned. Pride did not abandon him, nor the conviction that his fall was not the end, but only the beginning of something new. The fallen angels were expelled from glory, of peace, of love. Paradise, which had been an eternal shelter, now closed its doors with a force that no one had anticipated. There were no shouts of joy among those who remained. There was no joy in victory, just a quiet pain, a vacuum that began to fill the sky. Lucifer's fall not only meant the loss of an angel, it represented the loss of the very purity of heaven. Creation would no longer be the same, and although paradise was still a place of light, something had been irremediable altered mind. With the passage of time, Lucifer and his followers were thrown beyond the limits of heaven, where the light did not reach. There, in the dark abyss, they would find what they had sought, freedom. But that freedom would not be a gift, it would be a conviction. The abyss, a place as empty as his own heart, became his home. It was not a direct punishment, but a consequence of his own rebellion. The abyss did not offer love or forgiveness, only the eternal vacuum. But for Lucifer, that darkness was something else. It was the place where he could finally be his own god, the place where he could mold his own destiny. However, the fall was not over. Although Lucifer and his followers were far from the sky, his shadow would persist, not only about the abyss, but above all that would come later. Lucifer's pride, his disobedience, did not vanish with his fall. It wasn't just an act of rebellion, it was an irreversible change that would affect not only him, but all the beings that came later. The darkness he represented would continue to exist, waiting for the right time to open its doors once again. The expulsion of the rebel angels was the end of one chapter, but the beginning of another, much darker, much more complex. Lucifer's story and his fall was no longer just a betrayal story, it was a warning about what would happen when the light would turn against itself. And in the abyss, that light still burned, waiting for its opportunity to shine again, although it was no longer the way the sky had expected. The sky, once full of light and perfection, now kept an open wound, a deep emptiness that neither time nor stars could heal. Lucifer's fall and his followers was the time when everything changed. It was not only its fall that broke the celestial balance, but what arose from it. A new dimension was created, a dark place, full of suffering and despair, which did not exist before the rebellion. Thus the abyss was born. This was not an empty place, it was such a deep and so far space that not even the brightest light could cross it. The abyss was not just a physical, but also emotional, spiritual emptiness. A place where the soul was lost, a place where the conviction was not only temporary, but eternal. Here, in this dark space, what would later be known as hell was formed. Lucifer, the angel of light, had fallen into that abyss with all his fury, with his intact pride, believing that he would be the owner of his destiny. But what he did not know, what none of the fallen understood, was that the abyss was not a place where it could be dominated, it was a place that dominated you. And so disconnected space of the divine creation that its own being began to fade, to crumble, to lose its form. At first, the abyss was an empty space, like a backless abyss. Lucifer and the fallen angels wandered by him, looking for something they would never find, redemption. But the redemption did not exist there. It was a punishment, an inevitable consequence of his rebellion. The longer the essence of the fallen angels was diluted, their light was gradually extinguished. The abyss was not just a place of suffering, it was a place that transformed, that corrupted. The darkness itself seemed to come alive, wrapping each of the fallen with a power they could not control. But the Creator, seeing the magnitude of what had happened, could not allow chaos to reign forever. The abyss needed to be structured. It needed to be a place that reflected the eternal punishment, the punishment that would never end. And so, in the same way that heaven was created, hell was also, as a reflection of divine justice. Hell was not just a physical punishment, it was a condemnation of the soul itself. The fallen, condemned to crawl through the limits of that abyss, became shadow of what they once were. Lucifer, the brightest being in the sky, became a torn figure, a reflection of what he himself had chosen to be. He was no longer the angel of light, but the prince of darkness. There, in the heart of hell, darkness became his own lord. There were no days or nights, just an endless suffering that fed from lost souls. Despair was palpable, and the sound of the shouts of those who fell there never ceased. But the worst was not physical pain, the worst was the void, the abyss of their own existence that surrounded them. Hell not only destroyed their bodies, but reduced them to the most basic, to the most elementary, banished beings of creation, without hope, without love, without future. Hell was not a place with defined walls or limits. It was an infinite space, where time seemed to stop. The fallen souls did not die, but they could not find rest either. They were eternal, condemned to wander for a space that reflected its worst fears, its greatest mistakes. Every corner of hell was a mirror of its own sins. Hell began to be governed by Lucifer, who, although lost in his own torment, stood as a leader among the fallen. It had been created to shine, but now its brightness had become a destructive fire, one that only served to consume. His pride had not disappeared, but his power had changed. He was no longer the angel of light that once was, but a shadow leader, the king of an eternal suffering. Hell was not only a punishment for Lucifer and his followers, but also an eternal prison for their souls, who could never find peace. But within this kingdom of darkness, Lucifer had begun to build his own domain. The darkness became his kingdom, and every fallen soul that came there joined his army, not by his own will, but because of the curse that kept them tied. The demons were born in hell, deformed creatures and corrupted by Lucifer's power. They were not angels as before, but shared the same essence. And, over time, new hierarchies began to emerge within hell. The minor demons served the elderly, which in turn served Lucifer. Hell was organized as a kingdom, one where mercy did not exist, or justice. There was only the law of the strongest, the law of despair. Hell, although born of the fall of Los Angeles, not only represented the condemnation of those who rebelled. It also represented the failure of everything that was once good. It was the place where the shadows of the soul crawled, where pride, anger and desire could not be satiated. It was an eternal reminder of the fall, of the price of the rebellion, of what happened when the light darkened until it was completely lost. And thus, hell still existed, a divine creation born from punishment, a place of eternal suffering that reflected the abyss of the soul. The sky, although intact, could never erase what happened. Because hell, with all his pain, existed as an eternal reminder of the fragility of perfection. Lucifer's transformation in Satan was not a simple name mutation. It was a fall, a deep metamorphosis that reflected not only the loss of its light, but also the descent to a much more unfathomable darkness. Lucifer, who once was the brightest angel, the bearer of light, began to shed his original essence in a process that gave him not only a new title, but a new identity, a new purpose, Satan. The name Lucifer meant light, bearer of light, which brought the dawn. It was a name full of beauty and glow, a symbol of heavenly perfection. But this name became a shadow. In the abyss, in the midst of his fall and his separation of everything that had ever been, that name began to fade, to shed his brightness, like a star that goes out in the dark. Hell, with its eternal emptiness and constant pain, began to forge a new identity in Lucifer. His name no longer reflected what he had been, but what had become. As the ages passed, Lucifer's figure began to change. The light that emanated from him before, which had been so pure, was transformed into darkness. The fire that burned in his chest was no longer warm or soft, but an scorching fire that fed on anger, hatred, and pain. His soul, which ever shone with the Creator's light, now twisted in the flames of disdain and pride. The beauty that characterized him vanished and, instead, a distorted figure emerged, a monstrous, corrupted figure, who had nothing of that perfect angel that had ever been. Lucifer was stripping of everything that once connected it with the sky, and with each step towards his new identity, he moved away more and more from the light. In his mind, there was no longer the image of that angel full of goodness and devotion. What was left was a being who wanted to be more than God, a being that despised everything that heaven represented. And with that contempt, the name that would accompany him for all eternity began to be born, Satan. Satan, a name that means adversary, the one who opposes. A name that reflected his true being, the enemy of everything he once loved, the absolute rebel. While Lucifer lived in heaven, it had always been the light that was reflected in everything good and pure. Now, Satan lived in the dark, a being whose existence was completely opposite to the essence of creation. The abyss, which had been his home, now shaped him in his image and likeness. The name Lucifer no longer fit what he represented. He was no longer the bearer of light, but the prince of darkness. Satan was the manifestation of the corruption of his soul, of the destruction he had brought ego to everything that was once heavenly. He was no longer the fallen angel, but the leader of an army of shadows, the ruler of a kingdom of despair. Lucifer's transformation in Satan was also an act of denial. He denied the light, denied love, denied the peace he once found in creation. There was no remorse in his heart, just an insatiable hunger for power and control. And so, with his new name, Satan was erected as the king of demons, the ruler of the convicted, the eternal enemy of the Creator. Over time, those who followed Lucifer, those fallen angels who fell next to him, also adopted the new name of Satan. They were no longer angels, but demons. And under the command of Satan, an army was formed to challenge heaven, to challenge everything the Creator had ordered. The abyss was no longer just a place of punishment, he became the fortress from where Satan and his followers plotted his revenge, his war against light. Lucifer's transformation in Satan also reflected a deep change in the very nature of evil. It was no longer simply the disobedience of a heavenly being, it was the beginning of chaos, the desire to destroy all the good and pure, everything that the Creator had created with love. Satan not only opposed God, but aspired to replace him. I no longer sought redemption, but domination. He was no longer a fallen angel, but a being whose existence itself was the denial of the divine order. The name Satan began to resonate in the darkest corners of the universe, a name that caused terror among Los Angeles, a name that became synonymous with the deepest betrayal and suffering. But he also began to acquire power, not because of the light he once brought, but because of the darkness he now hugged. Lucifer's transformation in Satan was a reminder of what can happen when the light vanishes, when pride take control. Satan was no longer just a name, it was a symbol of the worst that can arise from creation itself, absolute rebellion, the rejection of light, the eternal challenge to everything that is good and fair. Satan, now the Lord of Hell, saw his fall as a victory. He had transformed his pain in power, his disdain in force, his fall in the base of his dark kingdom. Lucifer's transformation in Satan was not just a loss of name, it was a loss of his being, his soul. And that void was filled with an insatiable desire to destroy everything he once loved. The name of Satan, as the leader of the forces of evil, became an indelible brand of his eternal rebellion. The abyss was not witnessed only by Lucifer's fall. Beside him, wrapped in the same anger and pride, angels fell that once shone with their own force, each wearing a unique essence that distinguished them in heaven. They were not simple followers, they were powerful, feared, and respected beings. But at the moment Miguel's sword drew the line between the light and the shadow, they chose the side of the rebellion. And at that time, their names ceased to be synonymous with glory to become fear whispers. Azazel was one of the first. His name meant strength of God, and for centuries he had been the guardian of the heavenly mysteries. But in his heart a seed of disobedience germinated. Azazel did not fall for hate to his creator, but by desire. I longed to touch what was prohibited. When Lucifer won his rebellion flag, Azazel was the first to offer his loyalty, convinced that heaven should kneel before the will of the forts. After the fall, Azazel became the angel of corruption, teaching humanity dark secrets that should never be revealed. Samael, whose name resonated as God's poison, was another of the greats who fell. Samael was not always an adversary. In his heavenly days, he was the angel who fulfilled the divine judgments, the one who separated the life of death. But Samael got carried away by the pleasure of power. He did not settle for being an executor, he wanted to be a judge. His role as an angel of death was distorted, and at the end of the heavenly war, he was dragged into the abyss. Since then, Samael became the angel of destruction, a presence that toured the earth sowing chaos. Beelzebub, the lord of the flies, was one of the most feared. Originally known as Baal, it was revered for its ability to protect and guide. But vanity blinded him. When Lucifer claimed the throne of the heavens, Baal became one of his generals, leading the heavenly legions against Miguel's army. His fall was devastating. His name was deformed until he became Beelzebub, a parody of his former splendor. His image, once majestically, now reflected rot and decline. It became the demon that governs about pestilence and pests. Asmodeus, the angel of lust, was another of those who descended with Lucifer. Asmodeo, whose name means the one who makes disappeared, was in a time the angel that guarded human desires, the one who watched over the purity of love. But that same power tempted him. Asmodeus fell in love with the material world, was seduced by the lowest emotions and, instead of protecting hearts, began to corrupt. After his fall, he became the demon of lust, spreading excessive passion and lack of control. Leviathan, the angel of the depths, plunged into the abyss with his brothers. In heaven, Leviathan was the guardian of the heavenly oceans, a creature of colossal dimensions that symbolized strength and patience. But when Lucifer won, Leviathan did not hesitate to follow him. His fall led him to become a marine beast that inhabited the dark seas, symbol of chaos and disorder. The waters, which once obeyed their song, now roared with their fury. Belial, without value, was another of the angels who crossed the threshold of the rebellion. Belial, who once represented virtue and dignity, ended up being one of the most degraded after the fall. In heaven, he was known for his ability to speak with eloquence, to inspire. But that same eloquence became deception. He became the angel of lies, whispering false promises to those who crossed their way. On earth, Belial is the patron of corruption and betrayal, the spirit that hides behind false appearances. Mephistopheles, the angel of mockery and deception, was a brilliant strategist who never showed fear. In the heavenly days, he was in charge of questioning and challenging ideas, not for rebellion, but to strengthen the thought of his brothers. But that role led him to underestimate God's authority. He convinced that heaven did not need rulers, that absolute freedom should prevail. His arrogance led him to be one of the most cunning fallen. In the depths of hell, where the fire never ceases and the shadows whisper empty promises, three figures are erected as the pillars of Lucifer's domain. Beelzebub, Leviathan and Asmodeo are not simple demons. They are the generals of the fallen army, the lords of corruption, the beast and lust. Each one carries with him a scar from heaven, a twisted reflection of what once were. There are no words in mortal kingdoms that can describe the weight of their names. Beelzebub was the first to rise with Lucifer. His loyalty was instantaneous and absolute. In the sky, his name was Baal, the protector, the guardian of the roads. But when Lucifer's pride broke out as a flare, Baal did not hesitate. Devotion blinded him, and his fall was as fast as his ascent had ever been. The rebellion consumed it from within, transforming its light into something dark and structure. The sky no longer recognized its form. His presence became unbearable, and his name was desecrated, Beelzebub, Lord of the Flies. Since then, Beelzebub ruled the pestilence. His body, deformed and full of sores, became a symbol of decline. Where he steps on, the earth withers. His words are poison, and his breath brings pests that devour whole kingdoms. Beelzebub does not need armies to destroy. Your presence is enough. It is the Lord of corruption, and where reigns, order becomes chaos. But what distinguishes it is not only its destructive power, but its cunning. Beelzebub does not destroy for pleasure, he does it by strategy. He knows the weak points of humanity, and touches them delicately, knowing that rock will extend on its own. Leviathan is the beast of the depths, the personification of pure chaos. He does not speak, he does not negotiate. Just roar. In the sky, Leviathan was the guardian of the divine oceans, a creature that swam between stars like a fish in the water. But the rebellion Lucifer turned on a fury that even heavenly waters could turn off. When he fell, he did it as a comet burning in flames, crashing into the seas of hell. There, its shape twisted to becoming a colossal snake that lives in the darkest depths. Leviathan is incarnate terror. His skin is hard like iron, his eyes shine with blue fire, and his jaws can devour entire nations. The ocean follows it wherever it goes, and storms are its trace. But it's not just a beast. It is the Lord of disorder, the destroyer of stability. Leviathan hates creation because it reflects the divine order, and its existence itself is a challenge to the structure of the universe. From the depths of hell, he roars incessantly, and when his fury reaches the earth, the seas rise as walls to destroy everything in his path. And then is Asmodeo, the angel who let himself be consumed by desire. In the heavens, Asmodeo was the guardian of pure love, the one who watched the sacred unions and protected the hearts of mortals. But his fall was different. Asmodeus did not fall for hatred towards God, but for an insatiable thirst for pleasure and domain. He fell in love with humanity, but not of his goodness, but of his weakness. He discovered that desire could be a chain as powerful as any cell. And in that discovery, he lost himself. After the rebellion, Asmodeus became the demon of lust. Its form changed, but did not lose its beauty. On the contrary, his appearance is the most misleading of all. His face is still that of an angel, but his soul is blackened by desire. Asmodeus does not destroy with weapons, destroy with whispers. His words poison the heart, awakening passions that lead mortals to their own perdition. Under their influence, reyes leave their kingdoms, and lovers betray their promises. Wherever it goes, leave a trace of broken hearts and crumbled lives. Although different, Beelzebub, Leviathan and Asmodeus share the same goal: maintain Lucifer's dominance over hell and, someday, crush the sky under his yoke. They are the pillars of the dark throne, each governing a fundamental aspect of evil. Together they form an unwavering triad that supervises demonic legions. Beelzebub corrupts the body, Leviathan destroys the physical world, and Asmodeus devours the soul. Its power is absolute within the infernal kingdoms, and each commands armies that reflect its nature. Flies and pests follow Beelzebub, marine monsters emerge under the flag of Leviathan, and seductive and treacherous beings serve Asmodeus. But his loyalty towards Lucifer is not blind. Beelzebub observes with caution, knowing that one day he could try to rise above his lord. Leviathan obeys because chaos is its nature, but inside it burns a desire to tear everything, even Lucifer. Asmodeus, on the other hand, follows Lucifer because the throne of hell offers what he wants most: power and pleasure without limits. The generals of hell are not only demons. They are the very shadow of humanity, dark reflexes of the sins that lurk in every corner of the soul. And while the heavens maintain their light, they wait in the abyss, feeding on human weaknesses, knowing that hell does not need to make their way to earth. The doors open from the inside, when desire, corruption, and chaos consume the hearts of men. In the shadows of time, before the man populated the earth with his cities and his beliefs, there were spirits that wandered free, entities that did not respond to heaven or hell. Lilith was the first of them, the mother of demons, who refused to bow even before God. His name resonates in the legends of many cultures, a whisper that crosses the darkest nights and awakens ancestral fear in the heart of mortals. Lilith was not born in hell or fell from heaven. It was created from the same dust as Adam, the first woman, equal to him in essence and spirit. But its history is not narrated in the sacred books clearly, its presence remains on the margins, like a shadow that escapes light. When Adam tried to dominate her, Lilith refused. It was not created to serve. With a shout of rebellion, he left Eden, leaving behind the promise of paradise. It is said that he wandered the desert, where the burning winds caressed his skin, and the moon was his only company. It was there, between loneliness and vacuum, where Lilith found her true form. His body, once mortal, began to reflect the night. His hair became shadows, and his eyes shone with the fire of the stars fallen. But I wasn't alone. Ancient spirits approached her, those who, like Lilith, found no place in heaven or on earth. Lilith became the queen of demons of the night. It is known as the mother of the succubes, the demons that slide in men's dreams to tear them out of life. The legends say that every night, Lilith crosses the threshold between hell and the world of the living, looking for newborns to steal their souls, jealous of life she never had in Eden. But Lilith is not the only rebel spirit that lives in the shadows of history. Pazuzu, known in ancient Mesopotamia, is another of the great demons that challenged the light. His face was a mixture of beast and man, with claws that could tear the heavens and wings that eclipsed the sun. Pazuzu was not a simple destroyer. His presence brought droughts, pestilences, and famine. The mothers feared their name, because it was said that their breath could kill a child in the crib. Azazel is another of the spirits that crossed the border between divinity and darkness. In ancient texts, Azazel was a fallen angel, but his fall was not driven by the desire to power. Azazel taught humans to forge weapons, to discover hidden secrets that were not destined for them. He was the teacher of war and corruption. The ancients sacrificed goats in their name, throwing them into the desert as an offering to calm their anger. In the Hebrew and Islamic traditions, Iblis occupies a place similar to that of Lucifer. But unlike the fallen angel, Iblis was created pure fire. When God molded the man in the mud and ordered Los Angeles to lean before him, Iblis refused.
"Why should I bow to something made of mud when I was made of fire?"
he proclaimed. For his superb, he was expelled, and since then, Iblis vague around the world, whispering temptations to men, seeking to drag them with him to eternal flames. In the dark valleys of Japan, Kuchusei Kona, the spirit of a woman disfigured by jealousy and betrayal. It is said that it appears before travelers with a face covered by a mask. When the low, his mouth extends from ear to ear, and with a whispering voice, "Am I beautiful?" Those who respond badly find death in their hands. From the lands of Scandinavia, the figure of Mara arises, a spirit that poses on the chest of the sleeping ones, stealing his breath and causing nightmares. Mara is not a demon itself, but the reflection of the deepest fears of men, a shadow that feeds on their anxieties and whispers not saying. Lilith and the other rebel spirits are not simply demons that stalk from the shadows. They are fragments of ancient rebellions, echoes of a time in which the heavenly order was challenged not only by Lucifer and their angels, but by those who were born from the dust of the earth, of fire and wind. They are witnesses of the fragility of souls, guardians of the darkest corners of the universe. Even today, it is said that Lilith vague at night. Mothers place amulets on their children's cribs, while men avoid pronouncing their name when darkness falls. But there are those who seek it, those who feel inside the same flame of rebellion that once burned in the heart of Lilith. Because not everyone feared demons. Some receive them, hug them and call them by name, knowing that, in the deepest of darkness, a freedom that only the fallen know. In the arenas of Babylon, where the shadows of the ziggurats lengthened when the sun fell, a vision of the cosmos was born that deeply influenced the image of Lucifer. Babylon was not only an empire of conquests and laws, but a melting pot of myths, where gods and demons danced in balance, and each star in the sky had a dark reflection on earth. It was here, between the clay tablets and the songs to ancestral gods, where stories were gestated that, centuries later, they intertwined with the beliefs about the fallen angel. Marduk, the supreme god of Babylon, ascended to power after a fierce battle against Tiamat, the original goddess of chaos. In his victory, Marduk not only created the order but sealed the fate of those who dared to challenge him. The figure of Tiamat and its legions of monsters became an echo that resonated throughout generations, becoming the symbol of defeated chaos. But in the shadows of this narrative, the seed of a story that centuries later, with new words, would tell Lucifer's fall. Tiamat, like Lucifer, was not evil in its origin. It represented the primary power, a force that existed before creation. His rebellion did not arise from greed, but from the defense of his existence against the young gods. Like Lucifer, Tiamat was defeated, and his body was split in two to form heaven and earth. His defeat did not mean his disappearance, but his transformation in the foundation of the universe, a reminder that order is always born from destruction. Another Babylonian figure that resonates with force is Kingu, the consort to Tiamat. Kingu was the leader of the armies of chaos, a fierce warrior who fought against the gods hopefully to claim the dominance of the cosmos. When Marduk captured it, Kingu was executed and his blood was used to create humanity. Here the connection between the fall of a powerful being and the birth of mortals, a parallel with the Christian tradition that links the original sin and the expulsion of Lucifer with human fragility. However, Babylon not only contributed stories of defeated gods. The figure of Ishtar, goddess of fertility, war, and the morning star, also played a crucial role in Lucifer's evolution. Ishtar descended to hell in search of her lover, but her arrogance led her to be captured and stripped of her power. His trip, although different, reflected Lucifer's descent, a fall from glory to the shadows, driven by pride and the desire to achieve the forbidden. The morning star, known in Babylon as Ishtar's demonstration, eventually transformed into a heel, the Hebrew name associated with the star that appears at dawn. This connection with the morning star was one of the bases to identify Lucifer with the Chalba Lucerot in later texts. The Babylonians saw a duality in this star, a bright light that preceded the sun, but also disappeared before their glow, as if the star tried to reach glory only to be overshadowed. Babylonian influences in the figure of Lucifer do not end in the stories of defeated gods. The concept of apkallos, fallen wise who taught humanity forbidden knowledge, reflects the image of fallen angels who, after being expelled, sought to corrupt and guide men on dark paths. The apkallos were sent by the gods to instruct the kings, but their knowledge often brought chaos and rebellion. The Mesopotamian flood, reflected in the Babylonian epic, also keeps parallels with the fall of Los Angeles. Ancient texts suggest that certain gods or spirits were punished for teaching humans to challenge the divine order. Like biblical Nephilim, these beings were destroyed by the waters, a necessary cleaning to restore balance. But if there is something that defines the Babylonian vision that influenced Lucifer, it is the belief that chaos never disappears. He is defeated, sealed or asleep, but always awaits in the shadows, ready to resurface. Babylon taught the ancient world that the line between good and evil is not absolute. The gods can become tyrants and demons in liberators. Lucifer, like Tiamat or Ishtar, embodies this duality, a fallen force that, although defeated, remains necessary for the existence of balance. Thus, the Babylonian culture not only shaped the stories of heavenly gods, but also sowed the seed of a myth that would eventually take root in the beliefs about Lucifer. The fallen angel is not only a reflection of heavenly pride, but a shadow that has traveled through ancient empires, adopting names and shapes, but always keeping in its essence the memory of the gods that challenged the divine order. They say there was a time when heaven and earth were not separate worlds, and angels walked among men. They were not ethereal or distant figures, but beings of a beauty that challenged human understanding. But what began as admiration soon became desire. The angels, dazzled by mortal flesh, fell in love with the daughters of men. And from that union the Nephilim were born, gigantes, warriors, forbidden beings who did not belong to heaven or the earth. The ancient texts, from the Book of Enoch to fragments of the Torah, say that these children of fallen angels grew with a huge force and a pride that rivaled that of their parents. His mere existence was an affront to divine balance. They did not have a place in God's plan, because they were a mixture of the heavenly and the earthly, an aberration that challenged the laws imposed by the Creator. The Nephilim did not know limits. They were rulers and tyrants, and wherever they walked, the earth trembled. It was said that their laughs could make the mountains vibrate and that their swords were forged with the fire of the stars. Men worshipped them, not for love, but for fear. But the blood of their parents brought them an insatiable thirst for power. They were never satisfied with the earth, and looked to the sky with longing and resentment. However, not all the angels who descended did it by desire. Some, like Azazel, taught men the secrets of war, metallurgy, and dark arts. The knowledge they shared ignited a spark in humanity, but also brought corruption. The Nephilim learned Azazel to manufacture weapons that could leave the sky and divide the earth. The men, under their influence, began to build fortified cities and towers that touched the sky, believing that they could reach the gods. But the Nephilim not only inherited the strength of their parents, but also their arrogance. They became the first kings, raising empires and claiming territories with a hunger that was never satisfied. In his heart the inheritance of the fallen angels burned, and the heavenly blood that ran through their veins pushed them to challenge the laws of God. Some texts suggest that it was because of its cause that the flood unleashed, because the earth could not bear its weight or the corruption they spread. When the waters fell from the sky, the Nephilim fought against the storm. Their bodies resisted for days, but one by one they were swallowed by the waves. The ancient scriptures report that their screams resonated to the depths of hell while the sky closed the doors to their souls. There was no redemption for them, for not even God recognized them as his own children. However, the Nephilim were not completely eradicated. It is said that some survived, hidden in the cracks of the earth, wandering the shadows of the mountains. The ancient people spoke of giants who lived the hills and devoured the cattle under the full moon. Goliath was one of them, the last echo of a race that refused to disappear. But the history of the Nephilim does not end its destruction. His blood mixed with that of men, and his descendants walked among us, carrying fragments of heavenly inheritance. Some were born with superhuman abilities, with an intuition that touched the divine or a force that challenged the natural. The stories of heroes like Samson suggest that the blood of the Nephilim still beats in certain lineages, hidden but never extinct. Legends also talk about prohibited hybrids. Beings that were not entirely angels or all human. Creatures that roamed by the border of existence, trapped between two worlds, unable to find peace in none of them. These hybrids were persecuted, not only by men, but also by the angels themselves, sent to eradicate every trace of the prohibited union. The Grigori, fallen angels in charge of monitoring the earth, were punished for not stopping these unions. Even today, there are those who believe that the Nephilim never disappeared completely. But they also symbolize rebellion, the fight against imposed limits, and the innate desire to reach something beyond what is allowed. Because, although God closed the doors of heaven for them, the Nephilim did not stop looking for a way to open them by force. In the heart of the Old Testament, the figure of Lucifer does not appear with the clarity with which the Christian texts would later be described. There is no fallen angel that carries that name, not an explicit story that narrates your rebellion in the heavens. However, between lines and metaphors, in the prophets and the Psalms, there are traces of a shadow that hints at a heavenly fall, a presence that would eventually be identified as Lucifer. The best-known passage, the one that centuries would later be linked to the fallen angel, is found in Isaiah 14 verses 12 to 15. The text speaks of a star that falls from heaven, of a Lucero who, in his ambition to ascend and be like the Most High, is thrown into the depths. How you fell from heaven, O Lucero, son of the morning! Cutting you were on land, you who weakened to the nations. You who said in your heart, I will go up to heaven, on top, next to the stars of God I will lift my throne, but you demolished to the Seol, to the deepest of the pit. At first glance, Isaiah does not speak of an angel, but of an earthly king, the sovereign of Babylon. His pride and arrogance lead him to compare with the stars and proclaim himself as a god among men. The fall described in the text is a warning: no man, no matter how much he accumulates, can challenge the divine order without facing his ruin. But there is something in the words of Isaiah that goes beyond the condemnation of a simple mortal. The image of the Lucero, the star of the morning, is a metaphor that evokes an older reality, an echo that resonates in other traditions. In Hebrew, the word used for Lucero is helel, which means glow-tee or brilliant. This term is associated with Venus, the star that appears at dawn and that, despite its brightness, disappears when the sun emerges. The fall of Helel symbolizes the defeat of the one who wanted to shine above others and who, like the morning star, was overshadowed by divine light. Over the centuries, scholars began to interpret this Isaiah passage allegorically. It was not only the king of Babylon who fell, but an older entity, a heavenly being that represented pride in its purest form. In this interpretation, Lucifer was born as the symbol of cosmic arrogance, the first rebel, the angel who, dazzled by his own light, forgot that all his glory came from God. Another key passage that feeds this vision is in Ezekiel 28 verses 12 to 19, where the prophet launches a condemnation against the king of Tyre: you were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and completion of beauty. In Eden, in the garden of God, you were, of every precious stone was your clothes. You big cherub, protector, I put you in the saint mount of God, your heart was exalted because of your beauty, you corrupted your wisdom because of your splendor. Although Ezekiel seems to go to an earthly king, his description goes beyond the human. The Eden mentions the garden of God and describes this being like a cherub, a heavenly creature. The image of the fall of the king of Tyre begins to reflect that of an angel expelled from paradise, a being whose beauty and splendor were his downfall. These texts, when interpreted by later generations, served as the basis for building Lucifer's narrative. The combination of Isaiah and Ezekiel drew the silhouette of a being that inhabited the sacred mount of God, which was created in perfection and, because of its pride, fell from the most sublime heights. In the Hebrew Bible, evil is not presented as a unique figure or as an enemy of equal power as God. Evil is, rather, a force that is born from the choice and free will, a deviation from the divine order. Lucifer, as conceived by the subsequent tradition, embodied this deviation. But in the original Hebrew context, its figure is diffuse, as a shadow that hides behind mortal kings and corrupt nations. The Old Testament never explicitly named Satan as a fallen heavenly adversary. In texts such as Job's book, Satan appears as an accuser, a servant of God in charge of proving the faith of men. He is not yet the prince of hell, but a heavenly prosecutor. It is in this ambiguity where Lucifer's story begins to take shape, growing between the cracks of the prophetic texts and the stories of kings convicted of his pride. With the passage of time, the Jewish and Christian traditions wove these images until they shaped the myth we know today, the angel who wanted to rise on his creator and who, when he fell, dragged with him a third of the heavenly armies. Thus, Lucifer in the Hebrew Bible is not so much a defined figure, but a reflection of the inevitable destiny of those who challenge the divine will. It is an evening warning, a shadow that extends from ancient days, whispering to the ear of the powerful, no one escapes the fall when he tries to match God. The Book of Enoch is a work wrapped in mystery, a text that for centuries was considered too dangerous to be part of the official writings. Its pages tell a prohibited story, one that describes a hidden chapter of heaven, where angels were not always the guardians we imagine. Here, angels fall, not by God's will, but for their own desires, and the world is involved in the shadow of their rebellion. It all begins with the guards, angels sent by God to observe and protect humanity. From the heights, they contemplated the growth of men, the evolution of their kingdoms, and the beauty of the daughters of men. It was then that the transgression seed germinated. The guards, led by the Semihaza angel, began to desire the forbidden. Semihaza knew that what they were about to do was a betrayal of the divine order. But the desire was stronger. According to the story, he and 200 angels descended to the earth, crossing the veil that separated the celestial from the earthly. They took the daughters of men as wives and engendered a hybrid race, the Nephilim. The Nephilim grew rapidly, becoming giants, in warriors who did not know mercy. Ancient scriptures describe them as devouring beings, capable of consuming everything in their path. The world trembled under his domain, and the men, terrified, cried out to heaven for help. But the fall of the guards was not limited only to their unions with mortals. Azazel, one of the most feared fallen angels, taught men the secrets of steel and weapons. Rev he how to forge swords, how to manipulate metals and create jewels that ignited greed. It was Azazel who brought the art of makeup and sorcery, changing forever the nature of humanity. Men learned to make war, and women learned to use their beauty as a weapon. Enoch's book describes Azazel as the true corrupter, the one who taught all injustice on earth. While the Nephilim sowed chaos with their strength, Azazel unleashed corruption into the hearts of men, transforming their spirit from within. God, seeing the chaos that unleashed on earth, ordered the archangels to act. Miguel, Gabriel, Raphael and Uriel received the mandate to stop the rebellion. Miguel rose as the heavenly leader, directly facing Semihaza and his followers. Gabriel was sent to destroy the Nephilim, and Raphael received the task of chaining Azazel, throwing it at the depths of the earth and covering it with rocks until the day of the trial. But the punishment of the guards was even more severe. According to the text, Semihaza and the others were tied and thrown into a dark abyss, where they will remain until the big day of judgment. The Nephilim, by not belonging to heaven or the earth, found no rest after death. His souls became wandering spirits, condemned to wander the world as shadows, thirsty for revenge. The Book of Enoch not only describes the fall of Los Angeles, but also offers an apocalyptic vision. The guards, still chained, await the day their shacks break. The text suggests that their release will be a sign of the final times, when the doors of the abyss will open and the fallen will return to claim what they believe. It is this story that would later influence the Christian conception of hell and demons. Lucifer's figure, although he is not the direct protagonist of the Book of Enoch, finds echoes in Semihaza and Azazel. The rebellion against God, the desire for the forbidden and the inevitable fall are issues that resonate in both stories. Over the centuries, the Church decided to keep this book in the shadows, considering it apocryphal. But the text survived, hidden in monasteries, protected in Ethiopian traditions and fragments found in Qumran, among the manuscripts of the Dead Sea. Enoch's book offers a disturbing perspective. Evil is not always an external force that threatens humanity. Sometimes, evil is born from the same divinity of those who once were light and who, because of their pride and desires, became shadows. At the dawn of Christianity, the figure of Lucifer began to weave in the shadows of ancient texts, emerging as a symbol that not only represented evil, but also the deepest cosmic betrayal. It was not a sudden birth. Its history was formed slowly, taking scattered fragments of the Hebrew Bible, of apocryphal stories such as the Book of Enoch, and interpretations that the first parents of the Church built to explain the origin of evil. Primitive Christianity faced difficult questions. If God was absolute and perfect, where did evil come from? How could suffering exist in a world created by an omnipotent being? Lucifer's figure offered a disturbing response. Evil did not arise from something alien to God, but from his own creation. An angel, a creature of light, had been the first to fall. It was in this context where the passage of Isaiah 14 verses 12 to 15, which spoke of the fall of the king of Babylon, began to acquire a new dimension. The first Christians read between the lines and saw in the Lucifer his fall was motivated by pride, a pride born of the desire to be equal to God. For origins, evil was not something created directly by God, but the result of the choice of creatures with free will. Lucifer, when he fell, dragged with him a part of Los Angeles, thus becoming the prince of demons. St. Augustine, shortly after, would consolidate this vision in his work The City of God. For Augustine, Lucifer represented the corruption of the supreme good. His fall was not only personal, but marked the beginning of a cosmic war between good and evil that was reflected in human history. The devil, a name with which Augustine often identified Lucifer, became the eternal enemy, the one who with cunning sought to drag men towards condemnation. The New Testament also contributed key pieces for this narrative. In the book of Apocalypse 12, 7-9, a battle is described in heaven where Michael and his angels fight against the dragon, and he was thrown out, that great dragon, the ancient snake, which is called Diablo and Satan, who cheats the entire world. He was thrown into the earth, and his angels were thrown with him. This passage does not mention Lucifer directly, but the connection was inevitable. The first Christians saw Lucifer in the dragon, whose rebellion had triggered a heavenly war that ended his expulsion and that of his followers. Over time, Lucifer's figure began to merge with that of Satan. Initially, Satan was not seen as a fallen being, but as an adversary, a heavenly accuser who proved the faith of men. But primitive Christianity reconfigured this image. Lucifer and Satan became the same entity, the enemy of God, the prince of this world, the one who reigned over hell. The art and literature of the time reinforced this vision. In illuminated mosaics and manuscripts, Lucifer began to be represented as a glowing angel, who lost his beauty and became a monstrous figure. The light that defined it in the sky became darkness in hell. Lucifer's myth in primitive Christianity also fed on the persecutions that the early Christians suffered. For them, Lucifer was a reflection of the Roman emperors who demanded worship and persecuted the followers of Christ. Thus, Lucifer's fall became a symbol of the future defeat of all those who opposed the kingdom of God. Lucifer's consolidation as the great adversary was not only theological, it was emotional. The first Christians needed to understand the suffering and evidence they faced. Lucifer's figure provided them with a comforting explanation. Evil was an active force, but their destiny was sealed. Lucifer had fallen and, although he temporarily reigned in the world, his final defeat was inevitable. Thus, what began as a prophetic interpretation of a proud king ended up becoming the history of the fallen angel, the one who, for wanting to be more than God, was sentenced to burn in the flames of hell. A story that, centuries later, would continue to resonate with the same force, reminding humanity that even the brightest light can be extinguished if it challenges the Creator. In the Islamic tradition, the figure of Satan takes a different, but equally scary face. It is not Lucifer, the fallen angel, but Iblis, a fire creature that openly challenged God's will. Its history, narrated in the Quran, is a warning about pride and disobedience, a warning that resonates in every corner of Muslim faith. From the beginning, Iblis was not an angel as other religions described. The Quran is clear in this detail. Iblis was a yin, a being created from smokeless fire, while the angels were molded with light. Despite this difference, Iblis lived among Los Angeles, rising to a position close to God due to his devotion and knowledge. But Iblis's heart hid something dark, a spark of arrogance that, over time, would become flames of rebellion. The central account of its fall is found in several chapters of the Quran, with one of the most powerful versions in Surah Al-Araf 7, 11-18. When God created Adam, molding him from the earth's mud, he ordered Los Angeles and Iblis to prostrate him in respect. The angels obeyed without questioning. But Iblis, inflamed by her pride, refused. "I am better than him. You created me with fire and him of mud." Iblis's words were not just a statement of superiority, they were a direct affront against the divine order. At that moment, God expelled him from his presence, condemning him to live unfortunately until the day of judgment. But Iblis, far from repenting, launched a challenge: "Grant me a deadline until the day they are resurrected." God, knowing the destiny that Iblis had sealed for himself, accepted his request. From that moment on, Iblis became Satan, the declared enemy of humanity. His goal was clear: diverting the children of Adam, tempting their hearts and moving them away from the straight way. "By your power, I will deracharide them all, except for those sincere servants." The IB Quran story reflects a key difference with the Christian tradition. While Lucifer falls to wish to be the same as God, Iblis falls to refuse to accept Adam's dignity, the first man. It is not a desire for absolute power that condemns it, but the rejection of accepting the role of the human being in divine creation. This subtlety transforms Iblis into a symbol of contempt and envy towards humanity. In Islam, angels are described as perfect beings, unable to disobey God. Therefore, no angel can fall. Iblis is not a fallen angel, but a creature of free will, similar to humans, who chose to rebel. This choice makes it a constant reminder that pride and arrogance are paths towards perdition. Unlike Christian hell, Iblis's role is not to govern a kingdom of fire. Hell, or Jahannam, is a creation of God and is under its absolute control. Iblis is a wandering, a whisper who acts in the shadows, tempting and deceiving men and women to move away from the path of righteousness. The Quran describes it as al-waswas al-khannas, the whisper that is hidden, a force that does not act with gross force, but with soft words and deceptive promises. It slips into hearts when they are vulnerable, offering ephemeral pleasures and false hopes. However, Iblis's story is not simply a conviction. It is a living warning that repentance remains an open door for humans, although not for him. Iblis, blinded by her pride, refused to apologize. The message is clear: while man can recognize his mistakes and seek the mercy of God, there will always be redemption. Islam also emphasizes that Iblis has no power over those who fully trust God. Surah An-Nahl 16:99-100 declares that he has no authority over sincere believers. Iblis can tempt, but can't force. Its influence is strong, but its power is limited by the divine will. The myth of Iblis resonates not only as a story of rebellion, but as a mirror of the internal challenges facing each soul. The struggle between good and evil, between obedience and pride, does not occur in celestial battlefields, but within each human heart. Each temptation, every whisper, is an echo of the challenge that Iblis launched eons. Thus, in Islam, Satan is not an invincible enemy, but a test, a shadow that tests the spiritual strength of believers. And while Iblis awaits the day of the judgment, his final defeat is written, sealed from the moment he turned away from the path of God. In medieval art, Lucifer emerges as a figure that oscillates between fascination and horror, a presence that materializes in fresh, enlightened manuscripts and Gothic cathedrals. Each brushstroke, every sculpture carved in stone, was a palpable reminder of fate that awaited those who dared to challenge God. But beyond fear, medieval art transformed Lucifer into a symbol of warning and redemption, an omnipresent presence that reflected both the fall and the hope of salvation. In the first centuries of Christianity, Lucifer's representations were subtle, often camouflaged in images of dragons or snakes. The art did not show directly to the fallen angel, but insinuated it through symbols, such as the snake coiled in the tree of Eden or the dragon crushed under the feet of the archangel Michael. However, as the Middle Ages progressed, Lucifer acquired a more defined and terrifying way. The enlightened manuscripts of the 12th and 13th centuries show Lucifer in two different ways. In some, it appears as a fallen angel, still retaining vestiges of its ancient beauty. His wings are dark, but his face still keeps strokes of light, reflecting his original status as the bearer of light. In others, its transformation is complete: their wings resemble those of a bat, his eyes burn with flames and his skin is covered with scales. The beauty that once had has been replaced by monstrosity, a visual representation of its internal corruption. One of the most shocking examples is in the Chapel of the Scrovegni, in Padua, where the artist Giotto embodied Lucifer in the fresco of the Final Judgment. In this work, Lucifer appears as a devouring giant, sitting in the center of hell. Surrounded by condemned souls, devours them with incessant fury, reflecting the insatiability of their hatred. What this powerful representation does is not only the brutality of the image, but the contrast to the heavenly scenes above it. Lucifer's figure serves as a dark reflection of the divine order, remembering that even the most glorious of Los Angeles can fall into the deepest abjection. The Gothic cathedrals, with their imposing colorful facades and stained glass windows, also played a crucial role in the representation of Lucifer. In the Notre Dame Cathedral of Paris, Lucifer appears in the portal of the Final Judgment, being chained by the Archangel Miguel. Here, the image is not only a warning, but a representation of the victory of good over evil. The sculptures, carved with precision and drama, visually narrated the fate of the fallen, a silent lesson for the faithful who crossed the temple threshold. In medieval literature, Lucifer becomes a complex character, protagonist of epic and theological poems. Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy offers one of the most iconic representations. In the last circle of hell, Dante finds Lucifer trapped in the ice, motionless and eternally devouring the greatest traitors in history, Judas Iscariot, Gross and Casio. Dante describes Lucifer with 3 gigantic faces and wings that, when they beat, freeze the lake in which he is caught. This image not only reflects Lucifer's monstrosity, but also its impotence. His punishment is not to govern hell, but be his most famous prisoner. Dante's choice of placing Lucifer in the center of hell, not as a king, but as a convicted being, reinforces the medieval idea that evil, however powerful it seems, is subject to divine judgment. Lucifer is not omnipotent, it is a warning of the consequences of arrogance and pride. In addition to Dante, other medieval works such as the Paradisus Apocalypsis and the Theatrical Mysteries presented Lucifer as a charismatic villain, but convicted. Religious dramas, which were represented during festivities, showed Lucifer trying to tempt the saints and prophets, only to be defeated again and again. These works not only entertained, but reinforced the message that faith and devotion could overcome any temptation. However, not all medieval art demonized Lucifer completely. Some texts and works showed their fall as a tragedy, a reminder that even those closest to God can err. This vision humanized him, suggesting that his fall was not only pure evil, but the result of freedom and the desire to be something else. This is how Lucifer is remembered, not only as the fallen angel who challenged God, but as the bearer of a light that, paradoxically, led him to the dark. His name, Bearer of Light, is not an empty title. It is an inheritance, an indelible mark of its original nature, the one that never disappeared completely, even after its fall. There is something disturbing to think that the same light that illuminated the heavens was the one that opened the doors of hell. But what if that light was not just evil? And if Lucifer had not been just a traitor, but also a search engine, an angel who yearned for something beyond the divine order? Its history then becomes a dance between knowledge and rebellion, where the line between virtue and sin is blurred until it disappears. It is said that it was the first angel who dared to ask. In heaven, where everything was harmony and obedience, his mind burned with questions that other angels would never have formulated. Why should he bow before Adam? Why couldn't he sit next to God, share his power? It was not a dark creature from the beginning. It was the most beautiful, the wisest, who understood the mysteries that others could not even imagine. But that same understanding was what sowed in him the seed of dissent. In certain apocryphal and esoteric texts, Lucifer is not seen simply as the adversary, but as the angel of forbidden knowledge. An archetype that remembers Prometheus, who stole the fire of the gods to deliver it to humanity. Like Prometheus, Lucifer challenged the supreme authority, not only for pride, but for the desire to share the light he possessed. Was a traitor or a frustrated teacher? Some medieval thinkers, influenced by Gnostic currents, saw a wisdom bearer in Lucifer, someone who brought knowledge to men, even knowing that he would be convicted. This vision challenges the classical narrative, presenting it not as an absolute enemy, but as an ambiguous, even tragic figure. The light he carried was not extinguished. It became a torch that illuminated the dark corners of existence, offering answers to those who dared to look beyond what is allowed. However, Lucifer's light is not warm or comforting. It is a dangerous, burning, which consumes those who approach too much. It is the spark that ignites curiosity, but also the fire that burns when that curiosity becomes arrogance. Who follows its light can discover hidden truths, but at the same time, it runs the risk of getting lost in the abyss. Medieval art and literature, although they portrayed it as the supreme antagonist, could not ignore that fascination that Lucifer inspired. His representations often showed him with angelic features, with vestiges of his ancient glory. It was beautiful, even in its fall. That beauty was a reminder of its divine origin, but also a warning: not everything beautiful comes from grace, and not all light leads to salvation. There is something deeply human in this duality. Lucifer not only embodies evil, but also the search for freedom, the need to challenge the imposed and question. And maybe that's why his story has never been forgotten. Because in every human heart a spark of that same light beats, the desire to know more, to go beyond the limits, although those limits have been put by God himself. But that light is not free. Those who follow it must pay a price. The price of getting lost, of falling, of becoming his own enemy. Lucifer shines, but his light leads to loneliness. Those who follow it do so knowing that light can be transformed into shade at any time. Thus, the fallen angel continues his eternal march, carrying his torch through the ages. Not as a redeemed figure, but as a persistent echo that whispers in moments of doubt. The light it offers can reveal as much and destroy. And in that precarious balance, between wisdom and ruin, the oldest mystery of all is hidden. The figure of Lucifer, beyond being a simple antagonist, finds in the literature a space where its history becomes a deep and shocking tragedy. In the hands of John Milton, in his work El Paraíso Lost, Lucifer ceases to be a flat demonic creature and becomes something else, a tragic hero, a great being whose ambitions lead him to perdition. This vision humanizes the fallen angel, wraps it in layers of emotions, doubts, and a determination that ranges between courage and madness. Milton did not create an ordinary villain. His Lucifer is majestic, eloquent, a leader who inspires loyalty even after being expelled from heaven. The first time it appears in the work, it is not presented with horns or surrounded by infernal flames. Instead, Lucifer emerges from the shadows of hell with words of challenge and hope for his. Better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven, he declares, with a mixture of pride and resignation. That phrase, loaded with power and challenge, encapsulates its essence. Lucifer's tragedy does not only reside in his rebellion, but in the understanding that he can never be what he was again. He knows. He knows that his fall is irreversible and that every action to challenge God only sinks him more in the conviction. But instead of surrendering, embrace his destiny with a strong will. That is the heart of his tragedy. His greatness is also his greatest curse. In a lost paradise, Lucifer not only fights God, but against himself. There are times when his strength wobbles and his internal voice whispers the possibility of repentance. But that flash of redemption is quickly suffocated by its pride. Its character is a storm of emotions in conflict, where guilt and anger are intertwined with the determination not bending. Milton, with his pen, did not justify Lucifer, but he presented it as a figure that awakens compassion and astonishment. The reader cannot avoid feeling attracted to his fight, because, deep down, Lucifer embodies the same human contradictions. Who has not felt the weight of pride, the desire to achieve something forbidden, the temptation to challenge what is established? In that reflection, Lucifer ceases to be a fire creature and becomes a mirror of the human condition. Milton's influence crossed centuries, and his interpretation of the fallen angel left an indelible brand in literature and art. The tragic hero of the Lost Paradise inspired writers like William Blake, who said that Milton was on the devil's side without knowing it, presenting Lucifer with more passion and humanity than to the same angels of heaven. This duality caused theological and literary debates for generations, consolidating Lucifer as one of the most complex and fascinating characters in literary history. But Lucifer's tragedy goes beyond hell or sky. It is a tragedy of the soul, of eternal dissatisfaction. In his attempt to free himself from divine authority, he achieves only chain himself. His crown in hell weighs as much as his exile. The glory he was looking for becomes ashes, and his throne, in a reminder of what he lost. And yet it is impossible to look away from him. There is a beauty in its fall, a kind of dark poetry in its resistance. Because, although Lucifer has become the eternal enemy, his struggle resonates in every corner where there is a soul that dares to challenge the impossible. Lucifer and Prometheus, two names that resonate strongly in the myths and legends of humanity. Although they are born from different cultures and traditions, their stories are intertwined as echoes of the same eternal rebellion. Both challenged the gods, both stole a forbidden light spark, and both paid the price of their boldness with suffering and condemnation. But under the surface of their punishments a paradox beats: were they really villains, or were benefactors who brought knowledge and freedom to those who were destined to remain in the dark? Prometheus, the Greek titan, challenged Zeus's will by delivering fire to men. He did not do it for revenge or for arrogance, but for compassion, because he saw the weak, trembling and devoid of the divine spark. That fire was not only heat, but the flame of knowledge, the beginning of civilization. That act, although generous, was interpreted as betrayal, and his punishment was atrocious: chained to a rock, condemned to an eagle devouring his liver every day, only to regenerate at night. Lucifer, on the other hand, did not stole physical fire, but carried something even more dangerous: the light of questioning. He was the first to challenge the heavenly order, in asking why he should bow before God without more, why he could not share his throne. And when he was expelled from heaven, he didn't stop. His rebellion extended to humanity, offering the fruit of the prohibited tree in Eden, the fruit of knowledge of good and evil. Like Prometheus, his act brought wisdom to men, but also pain and awareness of their own fragility. There is a contradiction that travels both stories. The gods punish Prometheus and Lucifer, but in their acts of challenge something new is born, something that not even divine anger can erase: the evolution of the human being. Without Prometheus, men would have remained in ignorance, and without Lucifer, Adam and Eve would never have seen beyond paradise. Both are punished by the gods, but through their falls, humanity rises. This paradox is disturbing. Why are acts that bring light and knowledge considered sins? Why do the gods, who represent wisdom and order, fear so much when awakening those who govern? Prometheus and Lucifer embody the spark of rebellion, the inextinguishable desire to be more, to know more, to break the chains of submission. And yet, they are not portrayed as glorious heroes. His destiny is marked by suffering. Prometheus is never completely released from his punishment. Even when Hercules breaks his chains, the Titan continues to carry the weight of his rebellion. Lucifer, meanwhile, never stops falling. His conviction is eternal, his kingdom is hell, and his throne is a fire cage. But there is something in that fall that fascinates. Perhaps because, deep down, the human spirit recognizes that same spark in itself. The history of humanity has been a constant fight against limits, against the walls imposed by gods, kings, and unwavering rules. Prometheus and Lucifer not only represent the punishment of the rebellion, but also the inevitability that, sooner or later, someone will raise their heads and challenge the established. That same spark is reflected in each inventor that challenged the laws of nature, in each artist who broke the molds, in each philosopher who questioned the absolute truths. Prometheus chained, Lucifer falling from heaven, are eternal images that remind us that knowledge always has a price. But they also whisper us that this price, overlooks, deserves to be paid. Through the centuries, writers, poets, and thinkers have found in these figures an inexhaustible source of inspiration. William Blake, Shelley, and Byron saw in Lucifer and Prometheus symbols of the revolutionary spirit, of the desire for freedom that burns even in darkness. In his verses, Prometheus is not a simple chained titan, he is the liberator of men. And Lucifer, although banished, stands like the eternal nonconformist, who refuses to kneel, even before God's very. But the question persists: were heroes or villains? The answer may not matter as much as the fact that their stories are still alive. Because as long as there is someone looking for the truth, while there is someone who challenges the shadows, Prometheus's fire and Lucifer's light will never be extinguished. In the still early morning, when the night begins to retire but the sun still does not appear, a star shines with a lonely glow on the horizon. It is Venus, known since ancient times like the morning star. Its appearance is brief, a fleeting moment before daylight hides the day. That moment, ephemeral but radiant, is the very heart of Lucifer's myth. The name Lucifer comes from Latin, and literally means bearer of light, lux ferae. In the sky, the morning star seems to rise arrogance, challenging the dark, only to disappear when the sun arises with all its splendor. That ascent and celestial fall resonated in ancient thought, reflecting the history of the angel who wanted to rise beyond his place in the divine order. But there is an irony in this symbolism. Venus, the morning star, is not a real star. It is a planet trapped in its orbit, unable to get away from the sun. Just as Lucifer can never escape the weight of his fall, Venus will always be chained to sunlight, dancing around him, but without ever reaching. The connection between Lucifer and the morning star has deep roots in mythology and astronomy. The ancient Babylonians identified Venus with the goddess Inanna, Ishtar, a divinity linked to both love and war, which descended to hell only to return transformed. This cycle of descent and ascent was seen as a metaphor for death and rebirth, of light that falls in the shadow and emerges again. The Greeks also associated Venus with two figures, Phosphorus, the morning star, and Hespero, the afternoon star. For them, Venus seemed to be divided into two, as if a star was born at dawn and another, identical, died at dusk. That duality reflected the nature of Lucifer, angel and demon, light and dark, glory and condemnation. In the Bible, the reference to Lucifer as morning star appears in the book of Isaiah 14:12, where he laments, "How you fell out of heaven, Lucero, son of the aurora. Cutting you went by land, you who weakened to the nations." Although this phrase was originally addressed to the king of Babylon, over time, the Christian tradition interpreted it as a reference to the fall of the most beautiful angel of heaven. Lucifer became the star that tried to rise, just to be thrown to the earth. But there is something intriguing in this symbol. Despite his fall, Lucifer is still the morning star. His light persists, even in the conviction. He was not stripped of his brightness or his nature as a bearer of light. Even in hell, Lucifer shines. That paradox is what makes it such a fascinating and feared figure. Throughout history, the symbolism of the morning star has intertwined with ideas of rebellion, ambition, and redemption. Lucifer, like Venus, never disappears completely. His presence remains a reminder that even in the dark, there is light. But that light can be dangerous, because it is not warm or comforting. It is a light that burns, that invites you to look beyond what is allowed. In literature and art, Lucifer has been represented as a tragic, brilliant, but damned figure. Poets like Dante and Milton described him with a majestic beauty, even in the abyss of his exile. Its light, although stained, never extinguish. The mystery of the morning star persists in each dawn. When Venus appears on the horizon, it is difficult not to feel some concern. It is the light that announces the day, but also the one that precedes the darkness. That duality, that dance between light and shadow, continues to resonate in the figure of Lucifer, reminding us that the line between glory and the fall is as thin as the edge of a star that fades in the dawn. The devil has traveled a long way from the pages of sacred texts to become one of the most iconic and persistent figures in popular culture. From medieval nightmares to film screens, their presence is inescapable. The Prince of Darkness has ceased to be just a symbol of absolute evil to transform himself into a reflection of human concerns, adopting multiple forms that arouse fear, fascination, and even sympathy. Dante Alighieri, in the Divine Comedy, was one of the first to offer a detailed and vivid vision of the devil. His Lucifer was not the charismatic seducer that many would imagine later, but an icy creature, chained in the ninth circle of hell, eternally devouring the traitors Judas, Gros and Casio. This portrait of helplessness and pain was a warning: supreme evil does not bring power, but suffering and emptiness. Dante's devil does not queen, but is caught in his own punishment. However, centuries later, John Milton changed the rules of the game with his work The Lost Paradise. His Lucifer is majestic, a tragic hero whose words resonate with passion and challenge. "Better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven" became one of the most famous lines from literature, and with it a new image of the devil was born, a rebel who fights against destiny and divine impositions, embodying the spirit of insubordination. The devil stripped his chains and began to walk among men. In medieval legends, he disguised himself as a gentleman, merchant, or mysterious traveler, offering pacts and favors in exchange for souls. The figure of Fausto, immortalized by Goethe, exemplifies this dangerous treatment. Mephistopheles, the tempting demon, does not force Fausto to sell his soul. He seduces him, deceives him with words and pleasures, appealing to his deepest wishes. The devil was no longer just a punishment force, it was a shadow that lived in human decisions. With the arrival of cinema and television, the devil found new faces. In The Exorcist, 1973, evil adopts a subtle and devastating form, possessing an innocent girl and unleashing a terror that shook a whole generation. Horror films transformed the devil into an invisible but omnipresent enemy, capable of infiltrating homes and minds. But the devil was not limited to horror. In productions such as The Devil's Lawyer, or Constantine, appears as a seductive, elegant figure, with impeccable costumes and a disturbing smile. Here, the devil does not force, convince. He is a cunning negotiator who knows how to play with human weaknesses, offering power, fame or success in exchange for something more valuable: integrity, morals, soul. The world of music has also been a fertile field for its presence. Robert Johnson, the legendary blues guitarist, forged the famous legend of having sold his soul to the devil at a crossroads in exchange for his supernatural talent. This story reflected fear and fascination towards the covenant with evil, an exchange that always leaves scars. Today, the devil appears in all genres and formats. Series like Lucifer present it as a sarcastic anti-hero, more human than demonic, while in video games such as Blizzard's Devil, it becomes the final enemy that must be defeated. In each adaptation, the devil changes, but never disappears. Why does this figure continue to captivate? Maybe because the devil is not only a symbol of absolute evil, but a metaphor of the temptations we face every day. It is the reflection of ambition, of the desire for more, of that voice that whispers that certain rules can break. It is not always the monster with horns, sometimes it is an idea, an opportunity, a promise that seems too good to be true. The devil has evolved together with humanity, adapting to our fears and aspirations. In it we project our shadows, our internal struggles and our contradictions. And perhaps that is why, despite being the eternal antagonist, we cannot stop listening to it. In the darkest corners of theology and philosophy, a question persists as a flame that refuses to extinguish: can Lucifer be redeemed? The idea that the fallen angel, the one who challenged the divine will, could find forgiveness seems as impossible as intriguing. And yet, in the depths of human thought, an unavoidable concern arises: if repentance is the pillar of divine mercy, couldn't it apply even to the oldest adversary? Traditional writings are clear: Lucifer's rebellion was final. In the Apocalypse, its destiny is sealed with fire and eternal darkness. But sacred words also proclaim that God is infinite love, and his compassion has no limits. Is there then a crack in that conviction, a hidden possibility of redemption, even for those who embody the absolute opposition? Some theologians suggest that the real obstacle is not the lack of divine forgiveness, but Lucifer's pride. Repentance implies humility, an ego surrender to something superior. But Lucifer, the bearer of light, was the first to refuse to bend his knee, the first to say, "I won't serve." His fall was not so much an act of hate, but of affirmation: "I am my own God." How could I seek redemption then, if doing so meant renouncing the very essence of your rebellion? Others think that, in a way, Lucifer is already caught in his own impossible redemption. Every time he tempts, every time he causes the fall of a soul, he indirectly contributes to the divine plan. Through the test, humans grow, fall and get up, learning to discern between light and darkness. Thus, Lucifer is still a tool in the hands of God, a shadow necessary for light to make sense. But is that redemption, or simply a more complex conviction, where punishment is to fulfill a purpose without ever receiving forgiveness? The German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche offered a provocative vision: Lucifer could be the tragic hero of the universe, the bravest of all angels, because he had the courage to challenge the inevitable. In that rebellion, there would be hidden greatness, a twisted nobility. Perhaps his redemption is not to apologize, but to accept the role he chose, with all its consequences. Some mystical authors have suggested that hell is nothing more than a state of the soul, a self-imposed separation from divinity. Under this interpretation, if Lucifer ever wanted to return, hell would dissolve as a shadow before the light of dawn. The question, then, is not if God could forgive him, but if Lucifer would allow himself to be forgiven. There are those who imagine an alternative ending. That at the end of the times, when the universe is consumed in the final judgment, even Lucifer will find his way back. That divine grace will be so overwhelming that it will drag even the angel fallen back to light. That the last word will not be the punishment, but love. But this idea is not exempt from controversy. If Lucifer can be redeemed, what really does evil mean? Do you lose your meaning, your need to exist? And if the devil can be saved, what does that say about the nature of sin and punishment? Perhaps Lucifer's redemption is not a matter of possibility, but of perception. Maybe it's not whether God would forgive him, but if forgiveness makes sense without the existence of the fall. Because, in the end, Lucifer is not just a heavenly figure. It is a part of each human being. It is that spark of pride, that voice that pushes us to question, to resist, to look for answers beyond what is allowed. Can Lucifer redeem? Maybe the real question is, can we redeem the part of Lucifer that lives in ourselves? In the moments of greater weakness, when the mind hesitates and the soul hesitates, a family voice resonates in silence. It does not shout or impose. Whisper, it slides with the softness of a pen falling, and without hardly noticing it, their words are confused with our own thoughts. The devil never presents himself as an enemy. That would be a clumsy strategy. It appears as an ally, or advisor, a friend who understands the most hidden wishes. His power is not in the brute force, but in the ability to sow doubts, to touch just those fibers that the human being tries to ignore. Does not force, suggests. Does not demand, offers. And it is precisely in that subtlety where its greatest danger resides. From the beginning of the times, the devil has been the great tempting, the figure that appears on the threshold of each important decision. When Eve approached the forbidden tree, the snake did not order her to bite the fruit. He asked him questions. He showed him possibilities. Does God fear you are like him? It was not the fruit that lost man, but the idea that there could be something else. Temptation is not always involved in obvious sin. Often, he disguises himself as fair, something necessary. Jesus, the devil, did not simply offer wealth or pleasures, but bread when he was hungry, power to end injustice and glory to govern the world. Everything seemed logical, even noble. But in each offer, there was a condition, bending the knee, accepting that the end justifies the media. The devil understands that humanity does not fall for great evils, but for small concessions. One step, an insignificant detour, and the straight path begins to get lost in the distance. It is in moments of loneliness, when no one observes, where his voice becomes stronger. Who could blame you? Why resist, if no one will know? But there is an uncomfortable truth behind each temptation: the devil only opens the door, never pushes. It is the human being who decides to cross it. The choice always belongs to those who listen. And maybe that's why his role is so disturbing. Because in the end, when we fall, we know that we were ourselves who allowed it. In the most difficult tests, the devil acts as a mirror. It reflects repressed desires, hidden ambitions, and deeper fears. He does not add anything that was no longer inside. His temptation only reveals what was always latent, waiting for the right time to go to the surface. The tempting does not appear just to destroy, sometimes its presence strengthens. Those who resist, who look at their own demons, return with a firmer will. Temptation, then, becomes a forge. And the devil, unintentionally, becomes part of human growth. But there is not always redemption after the fall. Sometimes the price is too high. Erroneous decisions leave deep scars, and the echo of that tempting voice remains, remembering what could have been avoided. The most disturbing thing is that the devil never disappears at all. Its presence is cyclical, returning with each new test, every moment of weakness. Because he knows that, although the will is strong today, a crack tomorrow is enough to try again. And so, the dance between the devil and the man continues, as a eternal duel where temptation is both a curse and an opportunity. Because in that dark whisper, there is also a hidden lesson: true strength is never to avoid temptation, but face it and move on. It all started with a warning. A single mandate in a garden where perfection reigned. But in the heart of that paradise, something more stalked, something that was not seen but that felt in the air, like a shadow on the edge of the light. In the middle of the trees, there was a different one. Not because of its form or its fruit, but for what it represented. The choice. And it was there that Lucifer found his chance. I didn't need to destroy Eden, it was enough to plant a seed in human thought. The devil did not choose Adam. He went to Eve. Not because she was weak, but because curiosity burned in her soul, like a spark waiting for the first wind of wind. The snake did not directly lie, he simply twisted the truth.
Has God forbidden everything?
He asked, with an invisible smile between the leaves. Eve corrected. It wasn't all, just that tree. But there was the crack. A why, a question. Why not? What was wrong with knowledge? Lucifer knew that the human being cannot resist the forbidden. I long for it. It is in the denial where desire is born. And at that moment, Lucifer's fall also became the fall of humanity. When Eve extended her hand and took the fruit, Eden trembled, but not for the act itself. It was the decision that changed everything. Because that gesture, so small, was the first time that a human chose something different from the divine will. Adam did not resist. Maybe for love, maybe for fear of being left behind. But both bit, and at that moment, Lucifer won. Not because he destroyed them, but because he made them equal to him, exiled, separated from the light they once knew. Original sin was not just disobedience. It was pride, the same sin that consumed Lucifer. The desire to be more, to cross the limit, to challenge the established. That was the reflection of the fallen angel in Eve's eyes. And so, humanity joined his rebellion, not with swords, but with elections. But the fall of humans was not identical to that of Lucifer. God expelled them from Eden, yes, but he did not abandon them. While Lucifer fell into the abyss without promise of redemption, Adam and Eve left the garden with the hope of return. The devil did not disappear after Eden. He continued his work, weaving invisible threads in the history of men, tempting them, making them believe they could be like gods. Because, for him, the greatest victory is not to destroy us, but make us believe that we do not need to be saved. And so, the echo of the first sin persists, as a beat in the heart of each generation. Every time pride speaks stronger than humility, Lucifer smiles. Because he knows that, although Eden no longer exists, the snake never left. In the shadows of the future, a figure emerges, wrapped in mystery and fear. It does not hold horns or black wings, but words that shine with a misleading light. The Antichrist does not arrive with war, but with promises of peace. And it is there, in that apparent calm, where the omen of the end of time is hidden. The prophecy speaks of a man who will be like no other. Not a disguised demon, but a human being born from the same land he steps on. But inside, Lucifer's echo will resonate strongly. It will not come to destroy, but to conquer with real dressed lies. The world will receive it as a savior, without realizing that, when you open the door, you will be letting the last great darkness in. The signal will be subtle. There will be no explosions in the sky or cracks on earth at the beginning. The Antichrist will arise from the top, between kings and leaders, and will talk about unity, hope. His voice will be irresistible, and the whole world will bow before him, convinced that it is the response to his prayers. But the peace it promises is a golden cage. With each word, the free will fall apart little by little, until nobody remembers what it was like to live without obeying. It will not impose its power by force, but will make humanity deliver it voluntarily. The prophesies describe it with different names: the beast of the apocalypse, the son of perdition, the man of iniquity. But behind each title, it is Lucifer who moves the threads. The Antichrist is nothing more than the last piece of his rebellion, his final attempt to claim what he lost. However, the end of the world will not be immediate. Because even in the darkest days, there will be those who see through the mask. Those who recognize the hidden lie under the promise, those who feel in their soul that the true light is not imposed, but is offered with humility. They will be persecuted, isolated, treated as enemies. The war of heaven will be reflected on earth. The Archangel Miguel will rise again, this time not only against Lucifer, but against your incarnate reflex. It will be the battle that will close the cycle initiated with the first rebellion. The fate of men and angels will be decided in that last confrontation. But even in front of the Antichrist, the greatest enemy of humanity will not be him, but the doubt. How to distinguish between the true Messiah and its false reflection? What will happen if El Salvador that they never arrive, and there are only the words of who offers immediate comfort? That is the final test. Because the Antichrist not only seeks to dominate bodies, but souls. Does not want the world, he wants to tear the faith from its root, sow hopelessness until no one believes that there may be redemption. And when the end of the times is closer, the truth will be clear to all. Because darkness can only be extended to where the light allows it. And although the Antichrist reigns for a while, his fall will be inevitable. Lucifer already fell once. And the fate of his last child will be the same. The silence will precede the rumble. When the apocalypse arrives, it will not do so with subtle warnings, but with the weight of accumulated centuries, with each tear spilled, each supply ignored. It will be the last dawn before heaven and earth face the final battle. Lucifer will know that his time is exhausted. He will feel that the eternity that he challenged so narrows, that the darkness that expanded as a mantle begins to tear. But it will not go back. He will never kneel. For him, defeat will be preferable to submission. The apocalypse speaks of 7 trumpets, 7 glasses, and 7 stamps. Each will mark a deeper fall in the abyss of the world. Wars, pests, and fire will cover the earth, not as punishment, but as a reflection of the human soul, corrupted for centuries of temptation. Lucifer will not move a single finger, you won't need to do it. Men will be their own weapons. Every act of violence, every word of hate, will be a victory for him. And when everything seems lost, when chaos reigns, it will rise one last time, convinced that this time there will be no light capable of turning it off. But the sky will not remain silent. Miguel and his legions will descend as a lightning. Fire swords will cut the fog of despair, and still pure souls will rise, shining like stars at night. The battle will not be of human armies, but of eternal principles, the will against pride, hope against vacuum. Lucifer, the first rebel, will face his greatest fear, the light that was once his essence. You cannot escape it. There will be no place to hide, because the final judgment will not be fought in fields or skies, but in the heart of each soul. The apocalypse prophesies that the beast will be chained, thrown into the lake of fire. But Lucifer will not shout in pain. His punishment will not be fire, it will be silence. He who was created to sing the glory of God will be in an eternal vacuum, where no voice will respond to his. And at that moment, when everything ends, humanity will understand. Lucifer was not defeated by the weapons of heaven, but by his own loneliness. It was his decision, his eternal refusal to accept that true force does not reside in rebellion, but in delivery. The apocalypse will not be the end of everything. It will be the end of Lucifer and its influence, but not of hope. Because after the last battle, the light will be reborn, more pure, brighter. And although the fallen angel has disappeared, his story will be recorded in the souls that, having faced him, learned that redemption was always possible, but it was never his choice. Lucifer will fall. And the light will continue. On the dark nights of the past, when the world had not yet been completely subjected by the Christian religion, the shadows were much more than simple absences of light. They were carriers of secrets, ancestral fears, and forces that humans did not understand. European paganism, in its wealth and diversity, housed a multitude of deities, spirits, and demons that walked among the living, not as simple myth figures, but as real, palpable presences. The figure of the devil was not reduced to the image of a creature with horns and tail. In pagan cultures, demons were multifaceted entities, which could be both benevolent and malignant, depending on the context and nature of the relationship between the human being and the spiritual world. In lands such as those of the Vikings, for example, the Jotun, giants, were primary beings of dark power, facing the gods of the Nordic pantheon, but not necessarily evil. In Celtic beliefs, the fairy and spirits of nature were forces that could cure or destroy, and often attributed a connection with the other world. The witches, meanwhile, were in the center of these stories. Wise women who knew the secrets of the earth, herbs, stations, and rituals. But, in the eyes of those who feared the unknown, became dangerous beings, associated with dark, diabolical pacts and black magic. It was believed that the witches, in their eagerness to obtain power, made agreements with demons or with the same devil, delivering their souls in exchange for power, immortality, or prohibited wisdom. These pacts were not always explicit, but the witches were seen as bridges between this world and the other. The vision of the devil, then, was fluctuating. For Christians, the devil was the greatest enemy, the fallen angel who had tempted humanity through disobedience and sin. But in paganism, evil was not always personified in a single figure. Evil was somewhat more dispersed, fragmented, and the relationship with dark forces was much more ambiguous. Malignant entities could be simple spirits of nature that became vindictive, or gods that represented the destructive aspects of the universe. The concept of dark entities was also common in shamanic practices. In places like the British Isles or the Slavic lands, the shamans and druids not only cured, but also faced invisible entities, sometimes invoking them to obtain power or information. These entities could be both spirits of the dead and minor demons that interfere in the world of the living. The knowledge of the spiritual world was dangerous, and those who possessed could be both venerated and feared. But if we look at the figure of the devil, the concept was not entirely absent. In rural peoples, stories talked about demonic beings with horns and calling eyes that roamed the fields, chasing lost souls or causing disease and misery. These demons were not necessarily the same being unique and personal as the Christian Satan, but a manifestation of the forces of chaos, death, and darkness that needed to be controlled or appeased. Rituals and sacrifices also played an important role. Often, it was believed that certain pagan rituals, especially those related to the cult of the earth or the gods of fertility, could attract the attention of powerful entities, some benevolent and others that represented corruption and damage. These acts, if they were not carried out correctly, could trigger the anger of the gods or the spirits, leading to an invasion of evil forces that upset the balance of the natural world. Thus, European pagan demonology was intrinsically linked to the understanding of the forces of nature, death, and human destiny. It was not only beings with horns and claws, but of complex spiritual presences that accompanied humanity in their daily struggles, both as protectors and destructive. Malignant entities were not bad by nature, but represented inevitable aspects of human life, suffering, death, chaos, the incomprehensible. And in that melting myth and beliefs, Lucifer, the fallen angel, was not an alien figure, but a reflection of human rebellion, of the struggle to understand and control the uncontrollable, of the thirst for power and knowledge that leads to the human beings to cross borders that should not. Throughout history, the devil, in all its forms, has been a constant presence, not only as the supreme figure of evil, but as the personification of the dark forces that are around the edge of everything human. Lucifer, the enigmatic and complex figure, is not exclusive to Judeo-Christian traditions. Through the myths of different cultures, we can find echoes of his rebellion, his desire for freedom, and his relationship with darkness. In Nordic and Greek mythology, there are similar figures in terms of character and destiny, such as Loki in the Nordic tradition and Hades in the Greek. Although they are not presented as the same, their trajectories, motivations, and roles in their respective myths share fascinating parallels with the history of Lucifer. In Nordic mythology, Loki is an embodiment, cunning and mischievous god, known for his ability to change form and deceive others. Loki does not follow the norms of the other gods and does not belong to the established order of the Aesir, which makes it a marginalized figure, a chaos agent. Although he is a god, Loki is not entirely aligned with the gods of good, such as Odin or Thor, but is not completely evil either. Often, he is seen challenging authority and divine order, just like Lucifer challenged God's sovereignty. Loki is a son of the giant Laufey, and his hybrid nature, neither completely god nor completely giant, places him in an ambiguous place inside the Nordic pantheon. This position of being alien to the world of the main gods is similar to that of Lucifer, who, although originally created as a perfect celestial being, becomes an exiled, stripped of his status after his rebellion. Both Loki and Lucifer are characterized by their ability to sow discord, their love for subversion, and their rejection of divine norms. Loki, like Lucifer, has a complex relationship with power. In many myths, it is he who triggers events that lead to cataclysms, such as the death of Balder, the god of light and beauty. His deception and cunning causes the fall of other gods, which finally leads to their imprisonment. Like Lucifer, Loki ends up being punished for his transgressions, locked in a cave where his poison falls on him, while his suffering becomes a warning of the consequences of challenging the established order. However, like Lucifer, Loki is not completely destroyed. His role in Ragnarok, the end of the Nordic world, places it in history as a figure whose destiny is intertwined with chaos and final destruction. In Greek mythology, the figure of Hades offers another interesting parallel. Although Hades is not a rebel like Lucifer or Loki, his dominance over the underworld places him as a figure that dwells in the dark, far from the light and harmony of Mount Olympus. Unlike Zeus or Apollo, Hades does not represent light or life, but death and beyond. His kingdom is not one of chaos, like that of Loki, but of justice, but its isolated nature and its relationship with the gloomy have a similar resonance with the fall of Lucifer. Hades is also a marginalized being. Although Zeus and Poseidon's brother, he stays with what is perceived as the worst of the kingdom of the gods, the domain of the dead. This isolation can be seen as a form of exile, as well as that of Lucifer, who is expelled from heaven by his rebellion. Both Hades and Lucifer are stripped of the glory they once had, Hades of Olympus and Lucifer of heaven, to become figures that relate to the negative, to the underworld, death and darkness. However, the fundamental difference lies in its natures. Hades is not, in the classical sense, a villain. He is a god who fulfills his role in the cycle of life and death, and, in many stories, he is fair and equanimous in his deal with souls. In contrast, Lucifer, like Loki, rebels for his desire for power and freedom. While Hades does not seek to change the cosmic order, Lucifer and Loki are chaos agents that, for their pride, challenge the divine system and the authority of their respective gods. Both myths share a central theme about the desire for power, the challenge to the established order, and the consequences of that challenge. While Lucifer and Loki seek subversion, Hades simply takes what has been granted. However, his separation from the rest of the gods places him in a role of confinement that he remembers Lucifer's conviction. The symbol of light and darkness is also reflected in these myths. Lucifer, the bearer of light, is associated with beauty and knowledge, but his pride leads him to the darkness of his fall. Loki, as a god of deception, creates chaos from the light of reason and order. Hades, meanwhile, is completely linked to darkness, but not in a sense of evil, but as part of a natural cycle that must be fulfilled. Ultimately, the stories of Lucifer, Loki, and Hades teach us about the nature of rebellion, marginality, and punishment. Each of these characters faces a fall or a destination of isolation due to their position against divine laws, either by active rebellion or by simply being those that inhabit the limits of the sacred. The similarities between them show us how different cultures have used their marginal figures to explore issues of power, justice, darkness, and sacrifice. Although the motivations and roles of these beings are different, they all share the deep yearning to transcend what was given to them, a desire that, in the end, costs them the glory they once had. And in that price, they become enduring symbols of the fight against the divine order and the final destination that awaits them. In the ancient lands of Mesoamerica, the gods were not distant or unattainable beings, but living forces, present in every aspect of the world. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered snake, stands as a figure that not only represents good and light, but is also a reflection of the ambiguity of the universe, of the forces that create and destroy, that teach and punish. His story is a fascinating parallel with the idea of fallen angels, heavenly beings who, like him, fall from their state of grace, but become symbols of transformation, rebirth and, at the same time, pain. Quetzalcoatl is one of the most venerated and complex gods of Mexican Mixtec mythology, also known as the god of the wind, of rain, wisdom and creation. Your symbolism, it is not limited only to the positive, it has a double nature that manifests both in its role as a creator as a destroyer, a common characteristic of the angels fallen in the Judeo-Christian traditions. Like Lucifer, Quetzalcoatl represents knowledge and lighting, but also the challenge and fall. The story of Quetzalcoatl has a deep resonance in the tradition of fallen angels, not only in its origin as a benevolent and protective god, but in its subsequent transformation. According to legends, Quetzalcoatl was banished from heaven, expelled by his own brother, Tezcatlipoca, who symbolized darkness, war, and destruction. This act of rebellion and subsequent exile reflects the fall of those heavenly beings that, in a moment of arrogance or desire to power, challenge the divine order and are forced to pay the price of their transgression. The fall of Quetzalcoatl is not just a loss of its divine status, it is a story of transformation and sacrifice. After his fall, he goes to the east, towards the horizon, in a symbolic act of renaissance. Quetzalcoatl becomes a redemption, whose sacrifice promises a new life cycle for humans, as well as the angel fallen from Judeo-Christian traditions becomes a figure of darkness, but also of knowledge. This fall, like Lucifer's, is not only the end of a heavenly being, but the beginning of something new, something that must be regenerated through light and darkness. The figure of Quetzalcoatl, such as the god of wind, rain, and knowledge, has a quality of continuous transformation. In the context of Mexican Mixtic, dualism is an intrinsic characteristic of the gods. Quetzalcoatl is not just the bearer of light, it can also be a destruction figure, since its intervention in men's lives is not always benevolent. Just as Lucifer is seen as a being that, despite his rebellion, has a deep knowledge that changes the course of humanity, Quetzalcoatl faces the ambiguous nature of his own being. It is not completely good or completely bad. The symbolism of the feathered snake reinforces this idea of duality. The snake represents the earth, matter, darkness, while feathers symbolize the ethereal, divine, light. In the figure of Quetzalcoatl, these two aspects are merged, the earth and the sky, the dark and the bright, the mortal and the immortal. Just as Lucifer was the bearer of the light before his fall, Quetzalcoatl carries the burden of light and darkness within himself, as a constant reminder that the balance between the two is necessary for existence. In its history, we also find the figure of temptation and prohibited knowledge. Quetzalcoatl taught humans to cultivate corn, to create tools, and develop civilization, but it is also the one who, being deceived by his brother Tezcatlipoca, falls into the sin of pride. This temptation of power and knowledge, the belief that it could reach a divine state, leads it to its own fall, and in this way, the knowledge acquired through the rebellion is at the same time the cause of its exile. This aspect of Quetzalcoatl has a deep echo in the figure of Lucifer, who is also known as the bearer of light, which brings forbidden knowledge, but whose fall is the consequence of excessive pride and a desire for unlimited power. In both stories, the act of rebellion is not only an act of challenge, but a form of lighting, although accompanied by a devastating price. The expulsion of Quetzalcoatl is also presented as a form of lesson for humans. The sacrifice of this god reveals that, despite the fall, there is the possibility of regeneration. The relationship between Quetzalcoatl and humans is transformed after their banishment. Humans must learn from the sacrifice of God and continue with their existence, knowing that the struggle between light and darkness is continuous, and that there will always be consequences for trying to exceed the limits imposed by the gods. The story of Quetzalcoatl and its relationship with humanity has a tragic dimension. Like Lucifer, Quetzalcoatl is not an evil being by nature, but a figure that reflects the internal dilemmas of the human being, the struggle for power, thirst for knowledge and temptation. Its fall is a warning, but it is also a way of understanding that the duality between good and evil is what shapes human existence. In this sense, Quetzalcoatl and Lucifer represent two sides of the same currency, the fall of the celestial being that, when rebelling, becomes a being capable of granting power and knowledge, but also condemned to live with the consequences of their actions. The ambiguity of these myths shows us that, in the world of gods and men, there is no claro binomial of light and darkness, but a mixture of both that defines the fate of those who dare to challenge the rules of the cosmos. In the vast and complex traditions of Buddhism and Hinduism, the notion of heavenly beings that fall in disgrace takes deeply different, but equally powerful forms. Demons, fallen spirits, and exiled beings play a crucial role in the religious and mythological narrative of these cultures, reflecting the internal struggles between the divine order and chaos. Although the concept of fall as we know in the Judeo-Christian tradition does not exist directly, the stories that involve heavenly beings that deviate from their original purpose resonate strongly in these two belief systems. In Hinduism, one of the best-known examples of fallen beings are the asuras, a class of beings that, although initially they may have been powerful and benevolent, fell into arrogance, selfishness, and greed, which led them to confrontation with the gods, devas them. Asuras are often represented as demons, enemies of the gods and, in many cases, as beings that rebelled against the divine order. In its stories, the theme of the fall is linked to the internal struggle between the ego and humility, between the absolute power and the balance of the universe. In Hindu mythology, the most famous asura is Ravana, the demon king of the Ramayana epic. Ravana, a powerful and devout being of Shiva, is blinded by his pride and his desire to power, which leads him to kidnap Sita, Rama's wife. Although Ravana is an incredibly wise and capable being, his arrogance and his lack of humility lead him to perdition. This fall of Ravana can be compared to the fall of Lucifer in the Judeo-Christian tradition, since both beings have great power and wisdom, but their pride and personal desires lead them to challenge the divine laws, which culminates in their fall and destruction. Asuras, however, are not completely bad. In some stories, they are described as beings that have their own moral code and that, in their early days, could have been well-intentioned. However, their deviation towards arrogance and the desire to master the universe is what finally makes them antagonists of the Devas, the heavenly gods. In this way, the Asuras represent a reflection on the duality of the human being and its ability to fall or ascend according to their actions and thoughts. In Buddhism, the figure of fallen spirits is less tangible and more philosophical, focused on the concept of Mara, the entity that represents temptation, ego, and the obstacle to reaching lighting. Mara is the demon who tried to distract Buddha in her meditation under the Bodhi tree, tempting him with worldly desires and visions. Although it is not a fallen demon in the Christian sense, Mara represents the power of unpublished passions and desires that prevent spiritual progress. In this sense, Mara is a symbol of the human mind trapped in suffering and ignorance, a force that must be defeated to achieve true wisdom. Mara is a figure that represents both external temptation and internal struggle. Like Lucifer, who rebelled against the divine order due to his pride and desire for power, Mara acts as the primary obstacle to spiritual awakening. Both represent a force that seduces human beings to deviate from their spiritual purpose, either through pride and rebellion, or by distractioning worldly desires and illusion. In Buddhist traditions, Mara is not only an external demonic being, but is closely linked to human nature. It is the personification of earthly desires that keep the beings trapped in the samsara cycle, the cycle of life, death, and suffering. The fight against Mara is internal, in the sense that it is about overcoming the temptations and the ego that reside within oneself, to free themselves from the chains of desire and ignorance. The story of Mara and the Buddha also reflects the dilemma of the rebellion against the divine or the natural. While Lucifer and Asuras fight for power and domain, Mara represents the power of attachment and ego, forces that distort the true nature of being. The fall of these beings, either through the ego or illusion, is a warning about the consequences of following selfish and mundane impulses. In Hinduism and Buddhism, the fall is not necessarily a divine punishment, but rather a consequence of the actions of being. Both Asuras and Mara represent a part of the human being that must be confronted and overcome. In these cultures, the fall is not the end, but the beginning of a transformation process. While Lucifer's rebellion or Asuras can lead to destruction, Mara's fall can be vist as an invitation to overcome the illusions that keep beings in suffering. The cycle of fall and redemption is present in these cultures, although with different nuances. Asuras can be destroyed, but they can also be regenerated when they finally realize their error, just like Mara can be defeated through spiritual practice. The lesson that underlies all these figures is that the human being is not destined to simply be a victim of fallen forces, but has the power to overcome temptations and achieve enlightenment or balance through self-knowledge and humility. In this sense, the fallen demons and spirits of Buddhism and Hinduism reflect a self-discovery and confrontation trip with their own internal shadows. Like Lucifer and the Asuras, the fallen spirits of these traditions remind us that the path to lighting or salvation is not exempt from struggle, sacrifice, and internal transformation. They are warnings about the consequences of succumbing to the ego, temptation, and desire, but also lessons about the possibility of transcending those states towards a superior order of peace and wisdom. In the vast tradition of European and American folklore, Lucifer has left a deep mark, not only in the official religion, but also in the stories told around fires, in small towns, and in the dark legends of yesteryear. The figure of Lucifer, the fallen angel, has been reinterpreted, transformed, and mixed with the peculiarities of each region, creating local stories that, although different in their details, share the same dark heart, rebellion, temptation, and fall. These regional narratives have resulted in a rich tradition of stories about Lucifer's presence and actions in the human world. In Europe, Lucifer is an omnipresent figure, not only in Christian beliefs but also in pagan and popular legends. In the rural areas of Germany, for example, it is said that Lucifer visited the villagers in the form of a strange and charismatic traveler. A famous story tells how a poor man was tempted by this stranger in the market, who offered riches and power in exchange for his soul. The man accepted, but soon realized that he had been deceived, and the stranger disappeared, leaving only the traces of his passage and a strong smell of sulfur. This Lucifer legend as a cunning and manipulator tempting is not unique in Germany, since, throughout Europe, it is frequently seen as a being that deceives mortals, using their cunning and charm to lead them to their downfall. In England, Lucifer's stories are often related to fear of the unknown and the presence of evil in lonely places. The stories say that Lucifer had the power to adopt any human form, even that of a wise old man or a nobleman, to manipulate those who crossed their path. One of the best-known legends is that of a young farmer who, being lost in a forest during a storm, was welcomed by an old man who offered him refuge. This old man gave him advice that seemed wise, but in the end led the young man to lose everything he had. When the farmer returned to the forest years later, he looked for the old man to confront him, only to discover that the man had never existed. Lucifer, in his most misleading form, is the teacher of secrets that humans cannot understand until it is too late. In Italian folklore, especially in the southern regions, stories about Lucifer are told as a character that not only tempted humans but also played with the laws of destiny and free will. In Sicily's stories, for example, Lucifer is mentioned as responsible for a series of misfortunes that fell on certain families. It was said that each generation of that family was condemned to make a fatal mistake due to a pact made in ancestral times with the devil, who had granted them power and wealth in exchange for a hidden price, their soul and that of their descendants. These stories are deeply tragic because they show how the human being, trying to make fun of his destiny, ends up trapped by the forces he tried to control. In Spain, the figure of Lucifer has also been central to regional folklore, particularly in the legends of the Andalusian region. In these stories, Lucifer appears as a seductive figure, often represented as a handsome and charismatic young man who appears in moments of great despair or desire. In a famous history of the province of Cadiz, it is said that Lucifer went down to the land disguised as a foreign nobleman, and fell in love with a beautiful young peasant. He offered riches and fame, but she rejected her offer without knowing who she really was. In a last attempt to seduce her, Lucifer cheated her, and he consciously accepted his proposal. After her agreement, the young woman was consumed by guilt and fear, and in the end, her soul was trapped, condemned to wander for the rest of eternity, remembering her encounter with the devil. In America, Lucifer's stories and demons are deeply influenced by the miscegenation of indigenous beliefs and traditions brought by European colonizers. In Mexico and Central America, for example, Lucifer's figure often merges with the ancient indigenous gods. In Azteca folklore, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered snake god, is a figure that, although it does not fall from grace in its mythology, becomes the archetype of temptation, while introducing humans into knowledge and arts, but also makes them fall into the sin of pride. The Christianized indigenous stories often portray Lucifer as a being that takes the form of an ancient god, manipulating the natives to reject their faith and customs. In the rural areas of South America, especially in countries such as Peru and Bolivia, there are stories of Lucifer appearing at popular parties and religious celebrations. In these narratives, it is said that Lucifer walks among mortals during religious festivities, taking human form or even appearing as a monstrous figure to prove the devotion and faith of believers. In a famous legend of the Andes, it is said that during a carnival party, Lucifer infiltrated the crowd, inciting the participants to fall into immoral behaviors, while mocking the presence of saints and religious figures. At the end of the party, many of the attendees felt a deep despair, because they realized that they had been manipulated and that their souls were in danger. These local stories, although they vary in their details, share a common theme: Lucifer as the tempting, the deceiver, a being who plays with human desires and leads them to perdition through empty promises and deceptions. Lucifer's presence in regional folklore is not only a figure of evil, but also a warning, a way of reminding humans of the fragility of the soul and the eternal struggle between good and evil. Lucifer, through these legends, becomes not only the heavenly adversary, but a reflection of human weaknesses and desires, representing the dangers of giving in to the temptations of worldly life. In the vast narrative of humanity, the struggle between good and evil has been a constant, an eternal battle that is fought in every corner of the human soul and the universe. From the first stories of gods and demons to the most modern stories, the duality between light and darkness has been one of the fundamental forces that configure our understanding of existence. This struggle, as old as humanity itself, is not simply a war between opposites, but a delicate balance where each one needs from the other to define their own nature. Lucifer, like the fallen angel, is the incarnation of darkness and pride. In his fall, he carries with him a fundamental part of the universe, light. But it is not just the absence of light that gives it its power, it is the rebellion, the desire to be more, the desire to challenge the divine. Lucifer, by rebelling, not only strips to heaven of his brilliant glow, but creates a new dimension of existence, one in which darkness becomes his own life. In this context, darkness is not simply the denial of light, but its necessary counterpart, its rival and, in a way, its mirror. Without light, darkness could not exist, and vice versa. Both forces are intertwined, they define each other, creating a cosmic battlefield that is reflected in everyday life. Good and evil, then, are not simply fixed categories, but are molded and changed depending on the context, the decisions made by human beings and the forces that play in their hearts. Light symbolizes purity, love and divine order, while darkness embodies insatiable desire, temptation and rebellion against the established order. Both aspects exist in each of us, being part of our essence, guiding us in each action, in every thought, in every dream. The human being is completely good or completely bad, it is the confluence of both. From ancient Greece to modern worldviews, the struggle between good and evil has been represented through mythological figures, such as the Titans against the gods of Olympus, or even the Hindu gods fighting the forces of chaos, represented by the Asuras in these stories. Darkness is not seen only as something evil, but as a necessary force for balance to be maintained. Chaos precedes order, darkness precedes light, and destruction can give way to creation. This concept of duality is also reflected in many religions. In Christianity, Lucifer is the fallen angel, but he is also the bearer of light, the morning star, a title that highlights the ambiguity inherent in his figure. Lucifer's rebellion is not only an act of evil, but also an act of freedom, a search for autonomy against a divine order perceived as tyrannical. In this way, Lucifer's fall is the symbol of the struggle of every conscious being that seeks to transcend and define himself, even at the expense of getting lost in the dark. Evil, then, is not simply an external force that attacks good, but an internal force that resides in each being. Temptation is not a distant entity that comes to become evil, but something that manifests itself in our own desires and decisions. It is the ego, vanity, fear that feeds darkness in us. The fall of Lucifer symbolizes that internal struggle that we all face at the time we decided to follow our own wishes at the expense of a greater good. Lucifer not only represents evil in the traditional sense, but the power of autonomy that, when it takes to the extreme, becomes a destructive force. In this sense, good and evil are two forces that not only coexist in the world, but also coexist within each human being. Light is necessary to illuminate the way, to give purpose of our lives, but it is darkness that allows us to choose, which gives us the freedom to decide between good and evil. Without darkness, the light would be empty, and without direction, without light, darkness would be absolute, and nothing could exist. Good and evil, then, are not separate entities, but are complementary forces that exist within a large cosmic cycle. In this cycle, the light is not immune to corruption, nor is darkness condemned to be evil. Lucifer, in his rebellion, not only created a universe of darkness, but also defined the nature of the light itself. His fall was not only an act of disobedience, but a manifestation of the struggle between the two forces that define the existence itself. In this way, the struggle between good and evil is not only a cosmic battle that is fought in heaven, but a personal battle that is fought within us, at all times, in each decision. The duality of these forces invites us to reflect on our own ability to choose, to decide between light and darkness in every corner of our lives. The balance between the two is fragile, and it is our responsibility to maintain it, knowing that, in the end, they are the elections that we make which determine which of these forces will prevail in our heart. Thus, the story of Lucifer, of his fall, of his rebellion, becomes the history of each of us, a story in which light and darkness are not only opposite, but forces that define our humanity, which they do what we are. The eternal dance between good and evil is ultimately the dance of life itself, a dance that never ceases, but always invites us to choose the path of light, even when darkness calls us. Lucifer, the fallen angel, has been one of the most enigmatic and provocative figures of religious and mythological tradition for centuries. We often associate it with evil, temptation, and rebellion, but there is a deeper and more transcendental dimension that can be revealed when we look beyond the traditional aspects of its history. Lucifer, in his act of disobeying God, not only represents the fall of a heavenly being, but becomes a powerful metaphor for self-knowledge and internal struggle for freedom. In his rebellion, Lucifer is not simply a villain who defies the divine order. In many ways, its history can be read as a symbol of human autonomy. When rebelling, Lucifer separates from the divine will, choosing to follow his own path, to take his destiny in his hands. This disobedience, far from being a simple act of evil, can be seen as the first act of self-deficiency. Lucifer, like any human being in his search for identity, seeks to understand himself beyond the limitations imposed by the higher power. Throughout the history, Lucifer's disobedience has been negatively seen, as a break with the divine will, but if we look at it from another perspective, his act of rebellion can be considered the first conscious act of self-discovery. Instead of simply accepting the role that was assigned as an angel, he decides to question his place in the universe, refuses to accept the predetermined role and seeks his own path. This desire to disobey is not necessarily evil, but symbolizes an individualization process, the need for a being aware of discovering and affirming its own existence. By disobeying, Lucifer faces his own nature and, in an act of courage, chooses to go beyond the limits established for him. Lucifer's disobedience becomes, in this sense, a metaphor of the inner awakening, of that moment when a human being decides to question everything that has been taught, all the principles and norms that have been imposed by society, the society, religion, or family. Lucifer's story, then, is the history of rebellion against external dictates and the search for personal authenticity. This process is not easy, nor clean, or necessarily benign. Like Lucifer, who dare to challenge the norms can find a world full of contradictions, loneliness, and conflict. But they can also discover, such as Lucifer, a new understanding of themselves, a new freedom that only arises through rupture with the established. Lucifer's figure, often labeled as the evil personified, has something in common with those who decide to challenge power structures, not only in political or social terms, but also in the most personal field, misunderstanding, loneliness, and, sometimes, condemnation. As Lucifer, those who rebel, who seek to challenge conventions, are often seen as deviant, traitors, or lost. However, what many do not see is that this rebellion is not necessarily destructive, but transformative. In his fall, Lucifer not only brings chaos to heaven, but also initiates a process of self-knowledge, of understanding to what extent his freedom is his, to what extent he can break with expectations to become something different, something new. In this way, Lucifer becomes a symbol of the modern human being, of the individual who, in his search to discover his true being, faces the shadows of doubt, fear, and confusion. Lucifer's story, from his brilliant light to his fall and condemnation, illustrates the cost of self-knowledge. To truly know who you are, sometimes it is necessary to rebel, challenge order, and face darkness inside you. This process can be painful, it can bring unexpected consequences, but it is the only way to a deeper understanding of oneself. In his act of disobedience, Lucifer, like any being that wishes to transcend, faces the difficulty of accepting his own imperfection, of admitting that the path to self-knowledge is not always straight or easy. Lucifer's figure, rebelling against the heavenly order, reminds us that true knowledge often requires breaking the expectations of others and facing the consequences of our elections. Throughout history, those who have sought the truth, who have challenged the established system, have been seen as dangerous, as heretics, as fallen. But it is precisely these individuals who often lead humanity towards new ways of thinking, being, and understanding existence. Lucifer, in his rebellion, becomes a figure of freedom, not the sense of freedom without restrictions, but in the sense of freedom that arises from the acceptance of oneself, from the recognition of their own limitations and disposition to face one's demons, to confront the dark within ourselves. This freedom, although expensive and difficult to obtain, is what allows the human being to grow, evolve, and find his true path. In this sense, Lucifer is not only the rebel, but also the teacher of those who seek to know themselves through their own mistakes, failures, and challenges. Through the figure of Lucifer, we learn that disobedience is not always negative, but can be a powerful tool to discover the truth. Instead of seeing Lucifer only as the enemy of the divine order, we can begin to see him as the change agent and the awakening. Disobedience, then, is not simply an act of rebellion against established norms, but an affirmation of autonomy, the ability to choose and create our own destiny. Lucifer, in his fall, not only becomes the symbol of evil, but also a symbol of personal transformation, a reminder that, sometimes, the only way to self-knowledge is the one that crosses shadows and darkness. This Lucifer metaphor shows us that rebellion, although painful and full of consequences, is also an essential part of the human journey to self-understanding. On this trip, every disobedience, every step towards the unknown, is an opportunity to face our own shadows and, in the end, find the light within ourselves. Humanity has always been a scenario of internal struggles, battles that are fought inside each being, rather than in the outside world. In each individual, it lives a complex duality, the desire or to do good and attraction towards the forbidden, the impulse to follow the straight path and the temptation to deviate towards chaos. Internal demons are not only mythological or supernatural figures, but deep manifestations of our own shadows, fears, and repressed desires. These demons are not found in the dark depths of hell, but in the depths of our being, constantly challenging us, trying to seize our will. When we talk about the internal struggle, we do not talk about something abstract or distant, but about a conflict that we all face, whether consciously or not. Every day, we face temptation, fear, anger, and sadness trying to dominate our mind and actions. These internal demons are presented in various ways: the envy that consumes us when we see the success of others, the fault that torments us for past errors, the fear that paralyzes us and prevents us from moving forward, and the anger that drags us towards impulsive decisions and destructive. These demons are, in many ways, the manifestations of our own insecurities, of our own desires for forgiveness and redemption, which never seem to be enough. Lucifer, in his rebellion, is a figure that reflects this internal struggle. His fall was not only an act of disobedience against God, but an expression of the internal struggle that we all face: the desire of more, the rejection of conformism, the thirst for freedom and autonomy. But as is the case with internal demons, seeking his freedom, Lucifer not only moves away from the heavenly order, but also faces the consequences of his own desires and emotions. Its history is a warning about what can happen when we get carried away by temptation without reflecting on repercussions, when we surrender to internal darkness without trying to face it. Each human being is a battlefield where opposite forces fight for control. In moments of doubt, we all experience the whisper of internal demons, which urge us to give ourselves, to doubt ourselves, to take the easy way, even if we know that it will take us by a path of destruction. These demons are not external, they do not come from distant sources or from a supernatural being, but are born from our own emotions, thoughts, and desires. Each of us houses a little Lucifer inside, a part of us who wants to be more, who feels trapped, and that, sometimes, would rebel against everything and all to get what he thinks he deserves. Fear, for example, is one of the most powerful demons we face. Fear can be so great and so invasive that it can paralyze us, prevent us from making decisions, and lead us to lose our authenticity. Fear tells us that we are not good enough, that we are not able to achieve our goals, that we are destined for failure. But often, what hidden fear is our own inner strength, our potential to overcome what seems impossible. Like Lucifer, that when he rebelled he thought he was reaching its maximum potential, all of us must face fear and learn to recognize it as a part of ourselves, not as an enemy, but as an opportunity to grow. The fault is another internal demon that often consumes us. After making a mistake or hurting someone, we crawl under the weight of guilt, convinced that we will never be able to redeem us. However, guilt can be both a reminder of our humanity and a tool for reflection. It is not the fact of having made the mistake that defines us, but how we chose to answer before him. Lucifer, in his fall, shows the danger of being trapped in the mistakes of the past, without being able to see beyond them, unable to get ahead. In our own life, we must learn to recognize guilt, but without letting us dominate us. We must accept our imperfections, learn from them and move on, without allowing the shadow of what is prevented from seeing the light of future opportunities. Another internal demon that is omnipresent is anger. The rage we feel when someone offends us, when things do not come out as we want, or when we feel helpless in a situation. IRA, when it is not handled, can consume us, makes us make impulsive decisions and damage those who love, but, like all internal demons, anger has a lesson behind it. It is telling us that something in our life is not working, that we are being vulnerable or that we are not defending what is important for us. Lucifer, in his rebellion, gets carried away by anger, and he takes him to his fall. Like him, when we let ourselves be dominated by anger, we can lose our vision and our ability to think clearly. These internal demons are, after all, a part that end of the human condition. We cannot ignore them, we cannot reject them completely, because they are the ones that make us human. But what really matters is how we face them. As Lucifer, we are all destined to face our demons, our own shadows. Internal struggle is not only a conflict that is won or lost, but a part of the trip, an opportunity to grow, learn and, perhaps, find a new version of ourselves. Humanity, in its fight against its internal demons, is constantly in a process of self-discovery, redemption, and transformation. Lucifer's story is not only the story of a fallen angel, but a reflection on the conflicts that we fight every day, about how our own shadows can darken our path, but also how we have the power to face those shadows and find the light. The true victory is not to completely eliminate internal demons, but to learn to live with them, to understand them and not allow us to define us. The final destination of the universe, that moment of imminent judgment, has always been a fascinating and scary theme. The concept of a last battle, an epic confrontation between heaven and hell, has crossed cultures and religions, becoming one of the most powerful images of our collective imagination. In this cosmic war, good faces evil in a struggle for the control of the destiny of all souls and, with it, the future of all creation. And in the center of this conflict, there are, once again, the forces led by God and Lucifer, the fallen angel who rebelled against the light, dragging with his hosts of demons. Los Angeles, those heavenly entities that were at the beginning to serve the divine will, become the protagonists of this last battle, the warriors who fight under the flag of light. Facing them are the fallen angels, the demons, commanded by Lucifer, whose rejection of the divine order has led them to the abyss. Each of these beings, both faithful and fallen angels, have unimaginable powers and abilities, but what is really at stake is not only their physical forces, but the destiny of humanity, which is trapped in the center of the storm. The last battle is not just a war confrontation. It is a clash of principles and philosophies, obedience and unconditional love towards God, represented by Los Angeles, in the face of Lucifer's pride and rebellion. For Lucifer, this war is not simply for the control of the universe, but a personal battle to claim his freedom, his right to govern according to his own will, without submitting to the rules imposed by a superior being. But no matter how much he insisted on justifying his rebellion, which is actually looking for Lucifer is absolute control over everything that exists. This war is, in many ways, a reflection of the internal struggle of each human being, that constant battle between freedom and order, between the desire for autonomy and the sacrifice necessary to achieve the common good. The stage of the last battle is a chaotic and tumultuous place, a battlefield that does not follow the rules of reality we know. The sky has darkened with demons' hosts, the ground has covered itself with dust and fire, and thunder resonate throughout the universe. The end of time is approaching and all creation seems to wobble to the edge of destruction. The earth, the sky and the celestial kingdoms have been invaded by a thick fog, which looms over the future, filling everyone with a palpable fear. In this chaos, each soul has a decision to make. Will it align with the angels and the divine order, or will it succumb to the temptation of the power and desire for dominion of Lucifer? Throughout the history of humanity, good and evil have been perceived as opposite forces, in constant struggle for supremacy. However, in this final battle, it is not only a game of cosmic forces, but a personal confrontation between God and Lucifer, between light and darkness. God, who is omnipotent, observes from his heavenly throne, with the assurance that justice will be fulfilled, but also with an unfathomable sadness by the rebellion of his own son, the one who was once the most beautiful of Los Angeles. Lucifer, full of anger and despair, struggles not only to destroy God, but also to demonstrate that divine order is not the only way and that freedom, although dark, is a right. The final destination of this war, however, is not as clear as many suppose. In this cosmic confrontation, neither good nor evil are simply clear definitions. The loyalty of Los Angeles is tested, and the decisions of each one, whichever seemed predestined, become moments of judgment. Those who were once faithful to God, but who keep inland doubts, are tempted by Lucifer, whose voice promises freedom and absolute power. The battle, in this sense, is not only external, but internal. The last confrontation between heaven and hell is not a war simply of swords and fire, but of ideas, beliefs, and personal choices. While the battle reaches its climax, humanity is trapped in the midst of this conflict. Humans are not mere spectators in this war. In fact, they are the prize that Lucifer seeks and the treasure that angels must protect. In every human being, the struggle between good and evil is reflected as a war of everyday emotions and decisions. The fate of human beings, either in heaven or in hell, will be determined by their free will. Those who choose to follow the path of light, despite temptations, will be welcomed in the arms of God. Those who let themselves be seduced by Lucifer's power and rebellion will fall into the eternal abyss. The last battle, ultimately, is not only a physical confrontation between heavenly and demonic beings, but a cosmic challenge for the soul of each human being. And although victory seems to be a triumph of good over evil, the reality of the battle is that no being heavenly or deadly, it is unscathed. The fight has marked everyone involved, even those who have triumphed. In this final conflict, a terrifying and fundamental truth is revealed: the fate of humanity was never completely out of control. The decisions taken by each individual, the daily elections, are the ones that really decide on what side they will be at the end of the cosmic war. The last battle between heaven and hell is, after all, a reminder that good and evil are not only external forces that fight in the universe, but are within each of us. The final destination of Lucifer, the fallen angels, and of humanity, is intertwined with personal decisions, with the path that each one chooses to follow. The battle can be epic, darkness may seem overwhelming, but the future of creation is in the hands of those who choose love, faith and truth, regardless of how difficult the path is. Lucifer, the fallen angel, the figure of rebellion and despair, has left an indelible mark on contemporary culture, becoming more than a simple symbol of evil. His legacy, for centuries associated with darkness and condemnation, has evolved, becoming a multifaceted icon that resonates in the darkest and bright corners of modern society. In contemporary culture, Lucifer is no longer only the arch-neon of God, but a reflection of existential dilemmas, of the struggle for freedom, knowledge and independence. In the media, Lucifer's character has gone through multiple interpretations. From the biblical stories that present it as the rebel who challenged the divine order, to its representation in literature, cinema, and television, the fallen angel has been molded again and again to reflect the anxieties, fears, and aspirations of humanity in classical works such as Milton's Lost Paradise. Lucifer is presented not only as a villain, but also as a tragic hero, a being that, by rebelling against heavenly authoritarianism, becomes an admiration figure for those who seek to question the established system. This ambiguous character of Lucifer, divided between goodness and evil, is what makes it such a complex figure, that even those who have worshipped him in ancient history as the absolute evil, now contemplate him with some fascination, as a symbol of disobedience and autonomy. In modern literature, its influence is still alive. The fantasy novels, like Lucifer's Story by Mike Carey, show it as a character rather than simply malignant. Here, the idea that Lucifer is explored, by rejecting his default role as the enemy of God, seeks redemption and purpose in a universe that escapes him, showing his vulnerabilities and human desires. The fallen angel becomes a being aware of his power and his defects, a symbol of the internal struggle between good and evil, autonomy and fatality. This type of representation means that Lucifer is not seen only as a demonic figure, but as someone who reflects existential doubts and the search for identity that all human beings experience. In the cinema, films such as Constantine or Prophecy present us versions of Lucifer that face morality, justice, and destiny. In this type of stories, issues such as the power of choice, moral conflict, and the idea of a distant or implacable God are explored, while Lucifer, in his rebellion, becomes in a figure that defies the established paradigms, suggesting that the truth does not always reside in blind obedience. Through these stories, Lucifer is no longer only the bearer of evil, but a multifaceted figure that calls traditional beliefs about life, good and evil. In addition, in contemporary music, Lucifer's name is constantly evoking images of challenge and rebellion. Bands such as Metallica or Black Sabbath, whose lyrics often explore the struggle between light and darkness, have taken inspiration in the figure of Lucifer as the leader of an eternal rebellion against the established forces. Music, loaded with symbolisms and metaphors, makes Lucifer an emblem of those who oppose conformism and question power structures. In many songs, the fallen angel symbolizes the search for freedom, even if that freedom comes with a price, one that could be the perdition. However, Lucifer's influence is not only limited to art and popular culture. His figure has been used in philosophical discourses, in which he is presented as a representation of the individual who faces the oppression of the divine or the transcendental. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, for example, when talking about the Superman, takes elements of the figure of Lucifer to argue about the need for human beings to be released from traditional moral structures, adopting an ethic that challenges the pre-established norms. Lucifer, in this context, is more than an evil being, it is a symbol of resistance and autonomy, an archetype that inspires those who seek their own path in a world that frequently requires them to obey. In esoteric beliefs and occultism, Lucifer has been reinterpreted as a figure that, far from being an evil entity, represents prohibited knowledge and wisdom. In this area, Lucifer's rebellion is considered to be a fall, but a search for lighting. Gnosis, or deep and hidden knowledge, is seen as a tool to achieve spiritual freedom, and Lucifer becomes the guide of those who deviate from traditional religious doctrine to discover deeper truths. The fascination with the prohibited knowledge in these currents has been a fundamental part of modern culture, in which many people find comfort or direction in the idea that knowledge, although controversial, is the way to a more complete understanding of reality. Lucifer's legacy is, therefore, a legacy of rebellion and transformation. In contemporary culture, his figure has ceased to be a simple symbol of evil to become a reflection of the complexities of human nature. In his figure, the internal struggle, the desire for freedom, and the constant battle between order and chaos are recognized. Through generations, Lucifer has been adapted and reinterpreted to represent different aspects of our personal struggle to find our identity, our beliefs, and our place in a universe that, many times, seems to be beyond our understanding. Lucifer, then, is still alive in every story that tells our rebellion, in every fight we face to be more than they tell us to be. And, in the end, it does not matter if it is a fallen angel or a cultural icon, his influence lasts because he is in all of us, in our constant search to face the darkness and finally find our own light.